From the top rope and the Great American Bash, I bid you all good evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you may be in this great land of ours or around the world. Welcome to the $66 million studio. I'm the Pro Wrestle Machine. Let's get into this issue. Through the use of the Pro Wrestle Machine. October 26, 1998 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. Steve Austin takes Vince McMahon hostage on Raw. Judgment Day recap. UFC Brazil, more. By Observer staff. In an episode basically lifted from a fairly unknown movie Swimming with Sharks, Steve Austin took Vince McMahon hostage on the live Raw on October 19th, and spent most of the show teasing that he was going to kill him before shooting him with a pop gun, resulting in McMahon supposedly peeing in his pants. Between the ridiculously bad overacting by McMahon, the silly storyline that has potentially scary repercussions seeing 13,000 people enthusiastically rooting for Austin to pull the trigger on McMahon, and one of the worst main events in Raw history with an Undertaker vs. Kane casket match that was actually worse than their pay-per-view match the previous night and ended in a chorus of boos when both simply walked to the dressing room for a non-finish, it was generally, but not universally considered the worst episode of Raw in a long time. The movie this was based on was about a man fired from his job in an ad agency who takes his boss hostage in his boss's home. Many of the spots from the movie were recreated in the television angle which was teased from the start of the show. McMahon, acting ballsy, got all the wrestlers in the ring and said firing Austin was better than sex and claimed he could fire any of them at any time. Austin appeared on the Titantron in the parking lot with a .38 special. Two police officers, Milwaukee indie wrestlers, instead of arresting him, were asking him for autographs while McMahon cried to Gerald Briscoe, Pat Patterson, and Sergeant Slaughter. Earlier, a police officer with the guard dog gimmick from last week walked out tired of McMahon's browbeating. In a lame excuse to get Briscoe, Patterson, and Slaughter out of the picture, all three left 35 minutes into the show to get coffee and were never seen again. At the start of the second hour, McMahon got a phone call in his office from Austin, and tried to escape in his limo, but Austin was waiting and kidnapped McMahon and held him hostage the rest of the show as he constantly pulled out weapons such as a knife and bow and arrow and teased he was going to kill McMahon at the end while McMahon cried, and even oinked like a pig. But this is not a game of who can put on quality television or who is creative as opposed to who is stealing ideas from a bad movie they just saw. As we've seen in the past, one of the worst segments in the history of Nitro with Roddy Piper trying out members for his team in early 1997 drew triple the rating that Raw did head-to-head. Sometimes extremely bad can be extremely good for ratings. Raw won the ratings race for the fifth straight week with one of its best head-to-head numbers ever, a 5.01 rating, 5.02 first hour, 5.00 seconds hour, and a 7.33 share. Nitro, featuring the bizarre scene of Minneapolis Mayor Sharon Sales Belton being booed out of the building attempting to turn herself babyface to the large pro Jesse Ventura. Is that scary or what? Wrestling fans' constituency by aligning herself with Ric Flair and kicking Eric Bischoff out of the Target Center, did a 4.36 rating, 4.76 first hour, 3.89 seconds hour, 4.42 third hour, and 6.36 share. In the head-to-head 2 hours and 6 minutes, Nitro did a 4.17 rating. Raw won all 8 quarters and the overrun, most by a wide margin. The only time periods even competitive were the final 2 quarters were Raw, largely continuing the show-long soap opera but also with a Mankind vs. Venus match, did a 4.7, followed by another 4.7 for the soap opera plus Undertaker vs. Kane, while Nitro did a 4.5 for the Wolfpack vs. Black and White 6-man tag and another 4.5 for Hogan's Angle with Horace and Warrior. In the overrun, which was the most watched period for pro wrestling on cable ever as the two shows combined for an incredible 11.27 rating and 18.2 share, the Raw Angle Climax did a 6.25 to Nitro's 5.02 for the Bret Hart vs. Sting match, an angle that over the past 3 weeks has been a surprisingly hot ratings draw. In real numbers, that is 8,408,000 homes and probably 12 million total viewers during that 6-minute period. The New York Jets-New England Patriots game that went head-to-head did a 14.56 rating and 23.01 share. The Raw rating was pretty consistent throughout, dropping a little in the final 30 minutes probably due to switching to Nitro which gained at the same point. Nitro was weak for the first 45 minutes head-to-head, growing from a 3.7 to a 4.3 for the Jericho vs. Page match and growing again from 4.2 to 4.5 for the Wolfpack vs. Black and White 6-man tag featuring the Dueling Drunks. While it's clear who won on October 19th, on October 12th it's a lot less clear. Over the past 5 weeks, Raw has drawn a higher rating than Nitro. But in 3 of those same 5 weeks, Nitro, which airs in a statistically insignificantly smaller total number of homes, has had more viewers than Raw based on the statistical quirk we've noted several times about more viewers per home consistently watch Nitro, and in a close race that means ratings, which measure a percentage of households and not a percentage of viewers, don't necessarily constitute which show had the most viewers. October 12th was one of those days. In perhaps the most impressive showing to date for pro wrestling, Raw did a 4.81 rating, 4.72 first hour, 4.89 seconds hour, and 7.17 share to Nitro's 4.70 rating, 5.32 first hour, 4.34 seconds hour, 4.43 third hour, and 7.01 share. Those numbers, which over the head-to-head 2-hour period had Raw do a 4.74, the show itself went 6 minutes long, final 6 minutes were unopposed, which added 0.07 points to the overall number, to Nitro's 4.39 combined at a 9.13 rating. That figure was going head-to-head with the Atlanta Braves San Diego Padres National League Baseball playoffs on Fox doing a 9.5 rating and 16 share, and the NFL on ABC, which did its third lowest rating in its 29-year history with an 11.4 rating and 19 share. The combined audience of 10,048,000 viewers for Raw and Nitro over 2 hours is amazing considering the head-to-head sports competition. In ratings, Raw captured 5 of the 8 head-to-head quarters, with its biggest margin being a 5.87 to 3.57 when Austin and McMahon were verbally dueling on the ramp going against the terrible Rick Steiner and Chucky verbal duel. Taking that quarter away, Nitro would have won the entire night based on every category possible. During the period when both groups loaded up with their top stars in the tag match, it was WCW Sting and Warrior vs. Hogan and Hart match that did a 5.11 rating to WWF's Austin and Rock vs. Undertaker and Kane doing a 4.18, although that match did grow to a 6.2 when it went unopposed after Nitro went off the air. Still, it had to be a moral defeat for WCW to put Warrior's first televised match and the first confrontation in a match with Hogan in 8+ years and first tag team with Sting in 12 years and still not win the night. WWF did put its top 4 guys in the ring against them, and WCW did win the time slot. Nobody is fooling anyone into thinking Warrior actually means one iota in the ratings, and he's just being pushed because they've got the pay-per-view on the books, and because they have to justify his huge contract, similar to WWF to a much lesser degree with guys like Jarrett and Henry who have no charisma but keep getting new gimmicks and pushes until something sticks. However, in total viewers, it was Nitro that had 5,273,000 viewers on average for its broadcast of 5,141,000 for Raw, but that is also factoring in Nitro's 1 hour unopposed. In the 2 hours head-to-head, it was Raw with 5,072,500 viewers to Nitro's 4,975,500 viewers, or a difference of 9,700 viewers. Actual people meter ratings were a 3.09 for Raw and 3.03 for Nitro head-to-head. Over the past 5 weeks, Nitro was viewed by more people than Raw overall 3 times, although head-to-head Raw won at least 1 and possibly 2 of those 3 weeks, but probably all of those 3 weeks when it comes to the head-to-head, were so close that the sampling margin of error is less than the total difference. So realistically, in the past 5 weeks there have been 2 solid wins for Raw and 3 ties. Not including this past Monday, Nitro was still ahead in all male adult demos, all female adult demos except women 18 to 24, where WWF has done a major turnaround from being destroyed almost 3-1 to capturing a 64% market share over the past 2 months, while WWF has a 59% share of both kids and teens. However, WWF has greatly closed the gap in every demo that WCW was dominant in, particularly among women in the past month, and is running close to dead even in male 25 to 54, which from the start has been the prime Nitro audience. The only exception is women 55 plus, where WCW has actually widened its lead. Behind all the analysis is a simple fact, besides the obvious one about the current popularity. The WWF television, for the most part, and October 19th was an exception, is far better than WCW, and October 19th, they did have the shock value going for them. WCW has been living off its 1996 to 1997 success to stay as close as it has, because most weeks the gap in quality is far greater than the gap in ratings. And more importantly, during WWF's hot period right now, they are using the period to develop new stars, while WCW largely squandered its hot period when it came to making new stars, with the exception of Goldberg, whose character is lacking in depth and is in danger of being a flash in the pan, and Page, who is 43 years old. Is 4 hours just too long, or was the main event just that bad? Probably a little of both. There were a lot of complaints stemming from the WWF's last pay-per-view outing from Hamilton, ONT that between the 1-hour live Sunday Night Heat show and the nearly 3-hour pay-per-view event, it was just too long. In theory and in practice, it should be a great deal to have a 1-hour free television lead-in so millions of viewers get to see last-minute angles and hype for a pay-per-view show, since pay-per-view is largely an impulse last-minute buy. Even if it makes the pay-per-view show itself drag on, it's a plus because this is a money game way before it's an aesthetic game, see previous story. But there is a sacrifice on the side of product that is being made for the sake of money by running 4-hour live shows. Others felt that for whatever reason, Hamilton has had a reputation over the past year as being a hard crowd. Chicago is another story. Chicago is the hottest pro wrestling city in the country right now. The Judgment Day show on October 18th was the 5th straight sellout for the WWF at the Rosemont Horizon, and WCW is working on its own 4-show sellout streak at the United Center. The most recent of such shows took place just 6 days earlier. The Chicago fans for the most part stayed rabid, well not throughout the Nitro show, but were rabid for the last 40 minutes 6 days earlier for a pretty bad show. If the 4-hour live format was going to work live on a regular basis, Chicago would be the city it would work in. It didn't work, at least live or on pay-per-view. The crowd was hot for Sunday Night Heat for matches that weren't advertised. But for the hype pay-per-view matches, the crowd heat was again below par, and actually pretty weak most of the way. And by the time the big stars, The Rock and the main event came out, aside from the big pop for the People's Elbow, the show ended on a flat note. It didn't help that the Undertaker vs. Kane main event was as bad or worse than all but Hulk Hogan's worst efforts, and the finish was not only expected but worse than most of the Hogan main event finishes. After paying $29.95 for the second month in a row to not get a winner and using a pay-per-view simply as a way to try and build ratings for a free show the next night, this comes across as short-sighted and hot-shoddy as what WWF complains about WCW's booking. And when it was over, this felt like a longer version of an average WCW pay-per-view show. Some good work underneath and ending with big names putting on terrible matches. The event sold out the Rosemont Horizon about a week in advance, with 18,153 fans in the building, which was 16,458 paying $357,050 and another $144,939 in merchandise. There were 2 title changes. Newcomer Christian, the former Canadian indie wrestler Christian Cage, in his first major WWF outing captured the light heavyweight title from Taka Michinoku in a good match. X-Pac regained the European title from D'Lo Brown in what was almost universally agreed upon as being the match of the night. But the 9-match show only contained 3 good matches, and worst of all was the main event where both Undertaker and Kane were knocked out at the same time and ref Steve Austin counted the 3 on both of them and declared himself the winner, and then he was fired by Vince McMahon. So once again after a title match there was no winner, coming on the heels of last month's show in Hamilton where Austin, Undertaker and Kane were in a triangle match, both pinned Austin, and thus Austin lost the title, but neither man won the strap. This sets up a 16-man tournament for the title at Survivor Series on November 15th in St. Louis, presumably with Rock coming out on top, but these days plans like this change every time someone sneezes. Steve Blackman pinned Bradshaw, John Leafield, in 2:58 after a front kick. Aside from one major miscommunication spot, both worked their asses off in a fast-paced stiff match. Because both guys lack charisma, the crowd chanting boring anyway. Bradshaw worked as the heel. After the match, the Blue Blazer, Owen Hart, attacked Blackman and tried to hide his face while leaving. They are attempting to portray it as if everyone is supposed to know that Blazer is Hart. B. Giant Silva, Paulo Silva, and Kurgan, Robert Malay, and Golga, John Tena. Pete Los Boricuas, Jose Estrada Jr. and Jose Miguel Perez Jr. and Jesus Castillo, in 2:31 when Golga pinned Castillo after the old earthquake splash. Kurgan was in most of the way and his work, both his offense and selling, is real bad. Insane Clown Posse came out with the oddities and they even showed a video of them training under Luna to become wrestlers to feud with the Headbangers. One of the Posse guys came out with a hockey jersey with the name Great Malenko on it. ICP gained their 15 minutes of mainstream fame last year after being booted off their record label for controversial lyrics in a song called The Great Malenko. It's well known that ICP are longtime pro wrestling fans, in particular of the gruesome IWA-style matches in Japan, and have done so-called hardcore-style wrestling in nightclubs for the past 2 years. The song was named after Dean Malenko's father Larry, who was a legendary heel in Florida as the Great Malenko, and aside from being hardcore wrestling fans, they obviously also failed their spelling classes in school. But it was funny to see a misspelled WCW wrestler's name on the jersey during a WWF show. Not funny enough to save the match. After he bowed, the bangers jumped ICP and for whatever reason the oddities stood there dumbfounded. New Age Outlaws ended up making the save. See Godfather, Charles Wright, pinned Farouk, Ron Simmons, in 154 after a kick to the chest. Farouk has dropped considerable weight. Godfather was over as a babyface talking about Chicago having the best hose anywhere, with a hose, and offered one to Farouk. Farouk acted like he was going to accept, then jumped Godfather, and still got pinned quickly. After the match, D'Lo Brown and Mark Henry came out to congratulate Godfather, but instead turned on him, officially making him a face. Rock made the save for him. Jackal then came out with a new look, dressed up like the Harvey Whippleman character when they cleaned him up, and tried to console Farouk. That doesn't sound good for either guy. Before the next match, Michael Cole interviewed Paul Bearer and asked why he was there. Bearer said he was there to hang out with the boys and eat some food. Throughout the show they showed Bearer piling on the junk food on his plate. The announcers didn't believe he was there for the food. D-Scorpio Charles Skaggs pinned Jeff Jarrett in 341. Val Venus came out for commentary. The usher gave Venus a gift, which was a gold cup, the one you wear to protect the family jewels, and he stormed off. After a ref bump, Al Snow came out and put the head in the referee's pocket. When Jarrett saw it, he got distracted, and Scorpio pinned him with a sunset flip. This was a good TV match. Finally, Triple H came out to present the IC title belt to Ken Shamrock. Pat Patterson, Gerald Briscoe and Sergeant Slaughter were there, and Patterson made the segment saying that Shamrock reminded him of himself when he was young and went to Rio de Janeiro and beat 15 men in one night to become the first IC champion. Patterson said that Triple H had been a disgrace to the belt since he won it at WrestleMania. Of course he really won it at SummerSlam, and that was a planned miscue. Pat has been packing on the weight. Triple H handed the belt to Shamrock, then left the ring and told Ken to suck it. Well, actually the fans told him. After a break, Shamrock, in one of those monthly phantom angles with Triple H, slammed a car door twice, supposedly on Triple H's bad knee, although there was no leg in the door at the time. 1. Snow Alan Sarvin pinned Mark Marrow in 713. Jarrett came out but was ordered to the back before anything happened. Not much heat. Snow did a moonsault which wound up landing on Marrow's knees. With Snow going after Jacqueline, Marrow delivered a bad-looking low blow and a DDT for a near fall. Marrow did a moonsault block for a near fall. Snow went for a moonsault but Jacqueline pulled Marrow out of the way. Marrow did an Oklahoma side roll for a near fall, then hit a Samoan drop, but missed his own moonsault but about a mile. Marrow ended up recovering and going for his TKO finisher, but Snow turned it into his snowplow, Northern Lights bomb, for the pin. Both worked hard but there was something missing in the work as a lot of Snow's offense like the punching and the clotheslines don't look good, and the heat wasn't there for the match. 1.5 star. 2. LOD, Mike Hexstrand and Joe Laurinaitis and Darren Drozdov beat DOA, Ron and Don Harris, and Paul Ellering in 555. Ellering's arms were amazingly muscular for a guy who must be around 46 or 47. I wonder what he's shopping for when he spends all that time on the web. Mainly punching and kicking. It was the exact match you'd expect, but it had more heat than it would have anywhere else since LOD has the long history in Chicago. Most of the commentary was designed to build up a Hawk versus Droz feud as Jerry Lawler kept emphasizing that Hawk was the alternate on the team. Hawk and Animal did the Doomsday Device on one of the twins, I think 8-ball, but who knows, and the announcers don't tell them apart either. Droz jumped in and pinned him. Hawk looked mad since he was the legal man. Droz did an interview later talking about Hawk being slow to react while he got the pin in the match, and that's why he's on the first team. 1/2 star. 3. Christian, Jay Resso, pinned Takamichi Noku, Takao Yoshida, in 8:34 to win the WWF Light Heavyweight title. It appears the long-term plans are to make Christian and Edge into this brother babyface tag team like a Rock and Roll Express for the next decade. Crowd was dead, but this was a good match, particularly the performance by Taka. He did his awesome springboard plancha. Christian came back with a reverse DDT. Taka took an incredible bump out of the ring and Christian followed by doing the Silver King plancha on him. Christian missed a splash off the top. Taka sent him outside the ring and did a great Osai moonsault. Taka got several near falls before hitting a swinging DDT and signaling for the Michinoku driver, but in doing the move, Christian turned it into a cradle for the pin. Christian looked okay, but Taka was totally carrying the match. With his hair in his face, Christian can pass for 19, but when you see his face, he has a hard time looking like Edge's younger brother, as even though he's in his early 20s, Facially he looks to be in his 30s. 3 stars. 4. Goldust, Dustin Runnels, pinned Val Venus, Sean Morley, in 12:07. Even with the great wife-stealing storyline, the crowd just didn't care about seeing these guys fight. They were into both ring entrances and died for the match. Venus worked real hard and took a lot of big bumps for a guy his size, including a plancha, but isn't experienced enough yet to carry a match. Goldust, well, he's just Dustin Runnels, basically living for years off a rep as a good worker made when he feuded with Steve Austin in WCW 6 years ago, and he's been a sporadic at best worker since. Finish saw Terry Runnels on the apron and the ref distracted, and Goldust hit Venus with a low blow for the pin. 1.5 star. 5. X-Pac, Sean Waltman, won the IC title from D'Lo Brown, AC Connor, in 14:37. X-Pac may be the best worker in the WWF right now, and Brown may be the most improved. Good match from basically every standpoint and had the most heat on the show as well. Both did their patented hot moves and the crowd knows. They did a cross-up spot where X-Pac teased the Bronco ride, but D'Lo gave him a low blow, just to set up the spot later in the match. Chyna punched Brown for a near fall. After a ref bump, X-Pac used a back suplex. Mark Henry came out. Brown hit X-Pac with the title belt for another near fall. Brown got another near fall with a regular power bomb. Finish saw Brown come off the top, but X-Pac caught him in midair and gave him his facebuster finish. 3.5 stars. 6. Headbangers. Len Ruth and Charles Warrington beat WWF Tag Team Champions New Age Outlaws, Ryan James and Monty Sop, via DQ in 14:01 in a title match. Bangers worked hard getting a chance in the spotlight, largely due to the injury to Mark Canterbury and the Outlaws needing opponents. Overall it was a below-average match without much heat and with a weak finish, as Road Dogg hit Mosh over the head with a boombox for the DQ as a way to keep the program alive. 1.25 stars. 7. Ken Shamrock beat Mankind, Michael Foley, to retain the IC title in 14:36. Shamrock worked a real legit offensive style early, working on the leg with a lot of knees and leg kicks. His stuff was good, but not a lot of reaction to it, even if Mankind probably is the most sympathetic babyface character in the company this week. Now that Shamrock is a heel, he's about 3 to 5 months, if that, away from being over huge as a face. He did a sloppy Hurricane Rana. Mankind put the claw on, but Shamrock escaped out of the ring. Shamrock hit a few knees, but Mankind wound up whipping Shamrock shoulder first into the ring steps. Mankind picked up a chair, but Shamrock ended up kicking the chair into his face and gave him a sick chair shot to the face. Somewhere in there Shamrock suffered a bloody lip. Mankind escaped for a hold by biting Shamrock in the nose. Shamrock hit the belly to belly, but Mankind came back with a low blow, the 4,000th of the show thus far, and a double-arm DDT. Mankind dropped the elbow off the apron and came running after Shamrock, who caught him with a twisting power slam on the floor with his legs smashing on the ring steps. Thus injured, Shamrock clamped on the ankle lock. After a rope break, Shamrock put it on again. To block the pain in the ankle, Mankind began punching his own forehead, hard enough that he actually opened up a small cut over his eye, pulling out his hair, and finally put himself in the mandible claw and passed out. Shamrock went nuts when Howard Finkel said that Shamrock had won the match with the claw, and the storyline Jim Ross tried to get over is that it proved the claw was stronger than the ankle lock. Shamrock was suplexing refs after the match until Mankind put Mr. Sacco over his hand and put Shamrock down with the claw. 3.25 stars. 8. Mark Henry pinned The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, in 5:02. Henry read a terrible love poem to Chyna before the match. Crowd died 2 minutes in and didn't pick up until the People's Elbow spot, which got the biggest pop of the show. I think even with all of Rock's charisma, that when you add the total of Rock's charisma and Henry's lack of charisma, negative charisma, you ended up right around 0, which also describes pretty much the match. Brown showed up and distracted Rock, allowing Henry to clothesline and big splash him. Brown held Rock's leg to keep him from kicking out. I guess if Rock is going to win the title, they are trying to create Henry as a legit contender, but that attempt really shows just how weak they are on strong heels. 1/2 star. 9. Undertaker Mark Calloway went to a no contest with Kane, Glenn Jacobs in 1741 with Steve Austin as ref. The two shook hands before the match, which made perfect sense since they had just turned on each other the last week on television. At first, Austin wouldn't count as Undertaker had Kane pinned. However, when Kane had Undertaker pinned, Austin gave a fast count. Because they didn't want Austin doing a lot of counts, they couldn't do near falls, so neither did their big moves. It ended up being a slow-paced match where Undertaker mainly worked on Kane's leg with pretty much no heat. They blew a spot, and since there was no heat for the match, the only audible crowd reaction was the "you fucked up" chant by a very small segment and a lot of boos. Match was dragging on and the crowd started chanting for Austin. Finally the crowd started chanting boring. At 14:30, Austin got bumped when Kane moved, and Undertaker clotheslined him in the corner. As Austin staggered out, Kane choke slammed him. Undertaker and Kane then both beat up Austin. Paul Bearer came out and asked Kane to step aside so he could hit Undertaker with a chair, and in a totally predictable move, he then hit Kane with a chair, who no-sold the blow. As Kane went after Bearer, Undertaker clocked him with a chair. Austin recovered at this point but refused to count as Undertaker had Kane pinned. Undertaker argued with Austin, and Austin gave him a stunner and a chair shot and counted with both men laying on the mat and ruled them both the loser and himself the winner. After the match, Austin went backstage and it was deserted, looking for McMahon. He opened one door and it was Owen Hart, so everyone knew Hart was there as Blazer, who said that he was retired. McMahon wound up in the luxury boxes being pelted by fans, and Austin said that Vince didn't have the balls to fire him. Vince of course then fired him. See, Vince has the balls. Negative half star. And speaking of Vince, he was featured as the cover story of this week's New York magazine. In the story, McMahon claims that the television character of Steve Austin is actually playing the real-life role of Vince McMahon. I guess so was Woody Harrelson in the movie Natural Born Killers, and it was just a coincidence that the character Austin got it from was playing McMahon to begin with. McMahon and Undertaker are on the cover of the October 26th issue, calling wrestling the hottest sport in America in a story called Beyond Fake by Nancy Jo Scales. Overall, the story was well written and about as accurate as one could expect from an outsider writing about the life of the most prominent player in the game in a business where history in general, and McMahon's personal history even more so, changes depending on which way the wind blows. The cover itself is an interesting story. The magazine wanted a photo of Austin with McMahon as its cover, which McMahon refused and offered a photo of himself with Rocky Maivia, claiming that Maivia was soon to be the biggest star of the company. They refused that because they believed that The Rock was a wrestling star, but not a mainstream star, and that Austin was a huge celebrity since you see his t-shirts everywhere you go. McMahon steadfastly refused to allow Austin's photo on the cover without giving a reason, and was implying that Rock was being pushed as the new star and Austin was the declining star. Perhaps McMahon was willing to go so far as to pose with any wrestler in the company except Austin, because while all the other angles can be shown on the newsstands as phony, Austin versus Vince, the money angle, has to be protected, although the photo pose with Austin suggested was to be an antagonistic photo. The story talked about the hot period in the 80s and the fall of the WWF in the early 90s. In regards to the trial, McMahon apparently claimed, or the reporter misunderstood McMahon's complaints about the trial, to have been convicted of one of the 6 charges against him, conspiracy to defraud the FDA, and it claims it still irks him. Actually, he wasn't convicted of any charges. It noted that there is steroid use in wrestling, quoted me as saying that, and noted that Brian Pillman, who it was said had been a steroid abuser, died of a heart attack last fall. While Pillman did use steroids heavily as a college and pro football player, he stopped early in his wrestling career and had suffered health problems which largely caused him to give them up. In some part, steroids were probably partially responsible for his long shot of actually making it in the NFL, but were also responsible in a large way for his getting cut from the Buffalo Bills before his second season. He also used small amounts in attempting to make a comeback in 1997 after an ankle injury that by all rights should have ended his career. I was pretty adamant that Pillman's heart attack wasn't caused by steroids, not that his use probably did his overloaded 35-year-old heart any good. McMahon talked about his hotel acquisition in Las Vegas, saying they would have stone-cold betting chips, an Undertaker tattoo parlor and a Sable lingerie shop. McMahon talked about as a child sneaking out with the legendary Dr. Jerry Graham and bleaching his own hair blonde while a teenager to his father's chagrin. He no longer claimed to have invented localized market-specific interviews, but now claimed to have come up with the idea of using slow-mo replays on wrestling television. There was very little interplay and actual knowledge of what was going on in the industry in those days between different offices, but that was being used on the Channel 34 broadcasts of Los Angeles wrestling that went national in those days on the old Spanish International Network before it was ever used in the WWF, and somehow claimed that was responsible for making the WWF far more successful in the late 70s than his father ever dreamed of, which I guess should come as news to people like Bruno Sammartino, Billy Graham and Bob Backlund, who headlined the shows. Slow-mo most likely predated Los Angeles use on the Japanese network broadcasts as well. By the next story, he'll have invented something else that he innovated in the 70s. He was very vague about how he, who was actually bankrupt at the time, from previous non-wrestling related businesses that had gone south, raised the money to buy the company from his father, talking about a guru and a real sharp guy. And he admitted he paid back the other co-owners of the business with mirrors. He actually used cash from the company's bank account earned during the period before his ownership to use as payment money to buy the company. There was very little about a current wrestling war in the story other than the Austin Mcmahon storyline, which it called the most successful in company history, at least from a live attendance standpoint. The company is on its hottest run in its history and merchandise sales have never been better, has started pushing the WWF ahead in the ratings against its competitor, Ted Turner's World Championship Wrestling, which is about the only reference to the major competitive group. Which side is actually winning the ratings war today, which in reality has been almost a dead heat 3 of the past 5 weeks, depends on how one wants to manipulate the statistics. And the expected manipulating statistics were there. WWF was listed as being a $500 million per year company. If we add up all the figures we have privy to, which are the largest revenue streams, ticket sales, pay-per-view revenue, merchandise and TV ad sales, you get pushed the number up around $125 million per year, and with other merchandising and licensing, I'd suspect the real figure is in the $150 million to $175 million range. The entire pro wrestling industry in North America, WCW and ECW included, wouldn't even approach $500 million. Other problems were that it stated that around 1993 to 1994, when WWF hit its low point, that people were saying that the WWF was going to go under. I really don't remember anyone with any credibility ever seriously thinking that at the time, although it does make McMahon's comeback a better story. In a note about Marty Bergman, the husband of McMahon's attorney Laura Bravetti, who was accused in major stories in both the Village Voice and in the New York Post of fixing the McMahon trial by posing as a producer from A Current Affair and offering her, main government witness Emily Feinberg, money, but she refused. The reality was that Bergman was posing as a producer from 60 Minutes and claimed to Feinberg he could represent her in a potential TV movie deal, and while Feinberg didn't compromise her integrity by taking money from a TV show which would have hurt her credibility in court, Bergman posing as her agent did get enough knowledge as to what she did and didn't remember. By getting close to Feinberg, it later explained why Bravetti in the courtroom had an almost ESP-like knowledge of Feinberg's knowledge and memory and exploited those lapses with what at the time appeared to be remarkable and genius-like precision. Not that any of this would have changed the eventual outcome of the trial. It also talked about the Bret Hart story that spawned the McMahon is heel angle and the movie that is spawning many of the current storyline nuances. And without actually saying so, the story recognized that this story is just a prelude to the storyline Vince's return as a bigger babyface than ever. From the brink of extinction, can the Ultimate Fighting Championship start a comeback with a home base in Brazil? From most accounts, live of the first show held on October 16th before a sellout crowd of 8,500, which apparently was the loudest crowd live in the history of UFC, at the Ginásio de Portuguesa in Sao Paulo, Brazil, the third largest city in the world, behind Tokyo and Mexico City. Perhaps the momentum has finally switched. On the broadcast, UFC officials were talking about doing 9 pay-per-view shows next year, and privately the talk was that perhaps as many as 7 of those would take place overseas, mainly in Brazil and perhaps also back to Japan. The next show was announced for January 15th in Birmingham, Alabama, and UFC officials at the show were saying that they expected to be approved starting the next show to return to pay-per-view in Canada through Viewers' Choice Canada. BC Canada had cancelled airing UFC shows in 1996 after political turmoil in Quebec caused by an Extreme Fighting Championship show held on an Indian reservation against the wishes of the government, which resulted in the Quebec government arresting fighters and promoters. At the time, Canada was the strongest market for UFC, as it had in the glory days done as many as 60,000 buys in Canada alone, which by itself with the buys from dish owners in the US would be enough for survival. But that figure was at UFC's mainstream peak in 1995, and realistically they would be very fortunate in January to do 1/3 of that. Even with Canada added to the very limited cable penetration and the dish universe in the US, UFC still won't appear to have enough exposure to be profitable based on pay-per-view alone, so it would appear to need rights fees being paid by foreign promoters, such as the reported 5-show deal in negotiation with Globosport TV in Brazil, to continue on without wallowing in red ink, at least until a cable turnaround in the United States. With the new rule book just about finalized, the next big move will likely be an attempt to get regulated in Nevada, the most influential state as far as athletic commissions go. In the U.S., regulation in Nevada may be more political in nature than anything else. Mark Ratner, who heads the commission, is not anti-UFC, although he and Senator John McCain of Arizona were the anti-UFC forces years ago in a televised debate against Ken Shamrock and Semaphore Entertainment Group president Bob Merowitz on The Larry King Show. Previously Ratner, who has been busy of late with the much higher profile Mike Tyson reinstatement decision, had noted that Nevada rules specify fighting events have to take place in a ring, so the octagon fighting venue would be a violation of rules. In addition, Ratner is tight politically with McCain, and the governor of Nevada has also publicly come out against UFC. Whether Nevada regulation would cause TCI Cable to change its tune on carrying the show, at which point it would likely be a formality that Viewers' Choice and many of the major companies with the exception of Time Warner, which pulled out over the New York Times created controversy and isn't likely to rescind its ban, and perhaps Cablevision, which was the first major company to stop carriage, would follow suit is another question. TCI head Leo Hindery, a staunch foe of UFC from the start, had used the lack of commission regulation as its reason for not carrying the show, although the fact is recent shows in both Louisiana and Mississippi have already been regulated by local boxing or athletic commissions and still weren't carried. So while the real fights are being held outside the ring, UFC Brazil contains some good real fights inside it as well. Frank Shamrock became the single most decorated fighter in UFC history, capturing his 4th championship belt as he retained the middleweight title in the main event, giving the only man who had ever beaten him in the MMA world, John LeBay, a sound thrashing. With a rep as a ground submission specialist, this was a different Shamrock as he demonstrated more standing fighting skill than ever before during his 4-year career. Shamrock had been tied with Dan Severn, Mark Coleman, and Royce Gracie, each of whom had captured 3 UFC belts in their careers. The show set up a natural title match with Shamrock defending against Brazilian native Vitor Belfort, who destroyed Wanderlei Silva in just 45 seconds with his patented piston-like punching prowess, which, had UFC still had full cable exposure, would probably be the single biggest UFC match as far as interest and intrigue since all the interest in 1996 for a match that wound up never happening between Mark Coleman versus Belfort when both were unbeaten and looking to be invincible. And a native star was created in Pedro Rizzo, who knocked out UFC's most charismatic fighter, the out-of-shape version of Tank Abbott, who with his showing seemingly appeared that the evolution of UFC loaded with younger, more skilled and more versatile fighters, had passed him and most of the first generation of stars by. It was also announced at the beginning of the show that Randy Couture had been stripped of the heavyweight title. Couture, who won the title in December in Japan from Maurice Smith, will have gone through the year 1998 without a title defense, first missing a defense due to a rib injury, and his planned title match with Boss Rutan on this show fell through due to financial belt tightening. Couture was under contract for a specified deal for title matches, and Semaphore Entertainment Group told him they were unable due to all their financial problems to live up to the deal. Couture instead signed to fight on October 25 in Tokyo for Shudo against Enson Inoue. Shamrock was also working for less than his contracted agreement, but agreed to the lower amount for the chance to avenge his loss to LeBay. Even with a limited budget, the show consisted of 6 matches all involving ranked quality fighters. While not exactly detailed in discussion, they talked vaguely about a road to the heavyweight title, which apparently will consist of 2 singles matches on the January 15th show, with the most talked about pairings being Tsuyoshi Kosaka versus Boss Rutan and Mark Coleman versus Pedro Rizzo, with the winners meeting in a title match in March. Kosaka versus Rutan, if it should take place, has major political ramifications in Japan because it would be one of the top fighters from rings, and arguably the best or second best, against one of the top fighters from Pancrase, and arguably the single best and basically an interpromotional type shoot match between organizations that have in the past had very legitimate bad blood and probably still do today to a lesser extent on neutral grounds. There is an even bigger problem, as if Rutan and Rizzo win, then UFC is really checkmated as the two are good friends and won't fight each other. The feeling going in was that Abbott would beat Rizzo, therefore that wasn't going to be a problem. There has also been talk of putting Tom Erickson in the Coleman spot, if only because stylistically, Rizzo has similar strengths as Pete Williams, who knocked out Coleman. Rutan was at the show and did color commentary, although he actually didn't say a whole lot during the early matches. There were minor transmission problems from Brazil on the pay-per-view. The sound went out a few times and there were picture breakups. The announcers did a good job, hitting all the important points and strategies. For whatever reason, Jeff Blatnick was never referred to as UFC commissioner or head of the Mixed Martial Arts Council as his official title reads. There were 2 minor rule changes on this show. No kicking was allowed with shoes on, which is a Brazilian national law. UFC rules allow kicking with a certain kind of show. Also, they were even more specific in limiting grabbing the fence. 1. Ebenezer Fontes Braga 7-3, beat Jeremy Horn 9-4-3 in 328. Braga is from Rio de Janeiro and has previous losses to Dan Severn and Kevin Randleman. Horn, who held Severn to a 20 minutes draw and was ahead on judges' cards before submitting in 16:30 to Frank Shamrock at the last UFC, never got untracked here. Most of the match was standing, and Braga is the better striker. As Horn went for a takedown, he left his neck open and Braga grabbed a front guillotine and really cranked it in an ugly manner for the tap out. 2. Kosaka, 2-0, beat Pete Williams, 4-1, via a split decision after 12 minutes regulation and 3 minutes overtime. It was announced by ring announcer Bruce Buffer as a unanimous decision, but that was actually incorrect as the Brazilian judge voted for Williams. From a technical standpoint, this was the best match on the show. Once again, this also showed that nobody watches UFC for technical brilliance, as the fans booed this match, actually chanted the Portuguese word for fake at the two because neither would hit the other on the ground until late in overtime, since the two are friends and in the past have been training partners. When they were on the ground, both only worked for submissions. Williams used his reach to dominate the standing portion of the match, while Kosaka dominated the ground portion and to me clearly should have won the decision. Williams connected with a few punches and some nice high kicks early, one of which bloodied up Kosaka's nose. Kosaka came back with a beautiful judo hip toss takedown. Kosaka kept going for various types of arm locks, including straight arm bars and key locks, but Williams, who has unbelievable flexibility, never appeared to be close to tapping. At the 7 minutes mark, Kosaka had his best chance and had the arm bent 15 degrees past the normal breaking point, and asked ref John McCarthy to stop the match because he didn't want to break Williams' arm. McCarthy didn't, and Williams escaped. He tried it again and eventually Williams got to his feet, where they traded a few punches and high kicks. Williams got behind Kosaka and got him in a mount, but Kosaka reversed. Fans were booing when Kosaka wouldn't punch from the mount. In the overtime, they traded until Kosaka took him down. Williams finally escaped and landed a strong high kick right at the buzzer, and the two hugged. This would have been a great match in Japan, but since Brazilians are highly nationalistic and there was no Brazilian in the match, and they were fighting a technical match, it didn't get over live. 3. Pat Miletic, 23-1-2, beat Mikey Burnett, 1-1, via a split decision after 15 minutes and 2 3-minute overtimes to become the first UFC lightweight under 170 champion. This was a long, boring match. Like in boxing, they do weigh-ins one day in advance, allowing guys to deplete water to make a weight class, then eat and drink, and Miletic actually made 169, but some say weighed as much as 185 when he got in the ring the next day, so he was considerably larger than Burnett. While it's standard operating procedure in the fight game, in the recent Chavez vs. De La Hoya fight, even though they fought in the same weight class, their weights as weigh-in were only 3 pounds apart. When they went in the ring, De La Hoya was 18 pounds heavier. It would be fairer to do weigh-ins 2 hours before match time. Problem is, if a fighter then doesn't make weight, he has no time to sweat it off, which is why the 1 day ahead became the standard in most sports, although I believe in college wrestling it either has changed or there are strong movements to change it, as recent studies have shown in wrestling, and I'm sure this would be the same in fighting. That's 72% of the time, the heavier man when they go into battle wins the match. Most of the match saw Miletic, who did a tremendous job defensively but did little offensively, crowd Burnett and hold his trunks so Burnett couldn't get distance to throw. Burnett reacted by holding Miletic's trunks and they were giving each other wedgies and knees, and it looked almost sumo style most of the way. When they were on the mat, Miletic held Burnett in a guard with neither coming close to doing anything major. Just before the end of regulation, with both holding each other's trunks, Burnett threw 3 knees that landed near the groin area. Miletic complained about the third one and Burnett was assessed a penalty point, which turned out to be the difference. The first overtime was more of the same, and at this point the fight was even. In the second overtime, Burnett, still crowded, started throwing elbows to Miletic's back and some knees and actually got a near guillotine just as the buzzer ended. Due to the penalty point, 2 of the 3 judges gave it to Miletic. I'd have given it to Burnett, and he did win the second overtime, and I've heard nobody say that if it wasn't for the penalty point that Miletic still would have won, but it was so close, and there was the penalty point, so I can't say it was a bad decision. This decision has been heavily criticized across the boards. Burnett pretty much walked away in disgust when it was announced. But it was a very disappointing match. Miletic is a very classy fighter, as he really put Burnett over in his interview, talking about his amazing strength and that he deserved the belt, and then issued a challenge to Shamrock. However, as proficient as he is and as great a record as he has, with his only loss via controversial stoppage when he broke his nose in a match with Matt Hume, Miletic's fighting style isn't very exciting, as his greatest skill is his ability to neutralize the strengths of his opponent. Burnett certainly should be entitled to a rematch, but with Miletic's style, it may not be any more exciting than the first. 4. Pedro Rizzo, 7-0, beat Tank Abbott, David Abbott, 8-7, via knockout in 8:07. Abbott was announced at 268 pounds, and whatever his real weight was, he was out of shape, particularly compared to his last appearance. He seemingly knew it as he went out and tried to hit the home run. Rizzo, who is a skilled standing fighter, made Abbott look amateurish as he was able to avoid his lunging haymakers and was nailing him with counterpunches. Abbott was decked in the first 30 seconds and blown up within 40 seconds. He still moved forward and kept throwing, and to an extent, Rizzo actually seemed intimidated by his reputation and respected his power. Even when he tired about and was stationary and couldn't even keep his gloves up, Rizzo wouldn't press for the kill. Abbott hit him with a punch that reopened a cut underneath Rizzo's eye. Abbott was getting picked apart, but managed to take down and held Rizzo down, hoping for a second wind. McCarthy ordered a stand-up, largely to check on the cut under Rizzo's eye, which wasn't dangerous. When the match restarted, Abbott still couldn't even hold his gloves up. He was so blown and Rizzo was pounding him with leg kicks to set up a second knockdown. Abbott managed to get up, but Rizzo was easily nailing the almost stationary target with more leg kicks before nailing him with a punch to the nose that knocked Abbott out. I don't know how, but I do know that somehow Abbott and his supporters will explain that once again, even though he got knocked out in a one-sided fight, he supposedly still never gotten his ass kicked. Abbott was super over in his debut in Brazil, and the crowd heat was amazing as they all sensed Rizzo winning and were chanting his name in the closing minutes, and there was a total celebration all over the building when Abbott went out. It was a really exciting match. Rizzo dedicated his win to Marco who had suffered the crushing defeat last week in Japan. 5. Vitor Belfort, 6-1, beat Wanderlei Silva, 8-2, in 45 seconds. This was scary, as many people had Silva as the favorite, and even as late as the day before the show there was some question as to whether or not Belfort would back out of the match. Belfort, trimmed to 199 after fighting at 224 in his loss in 1996 to Couture, had regained his quickness, explosiveness and uncanny accuracy. Belfort threw 15 powerful punches to Silva's head, almost all of which connected, in something like 10 seconds, and it was over. Silva was the real deal, as he went into the fight with an 8-1 record, and his only loss was in September 1997 to Artur Mariano in Brazil in what was described as possibly the most gruesome fight in MMA history that he was getting the better of before it was stopped in Mariano's favor because Silva was badly bleeding. The crowd went nuts for Belfort, who was originally from Rio de Janeiro, and was considered the biggest drawing card on the show. Belfort did a really good babyface-style interview challenging Shamrock for a title match, and they again talked about Belfort wanting to represent Brazil in boxing at the 2000 Olympics. 6. Shamrock 5-1 beat LeBay, 3-2-1, in 740. Shamrock appeared with a totally different disposition, more of a cold, emotionless killer as opposed to his normal sportsman persona. He threw a hard leg kick that LeBay just missed catching the foot, and immediately a red target was placed on LeBay's hamstring. LeBay caught the foot the second time and had Shamrock's leg but still wasn't able to take him down. Shamrock caught him in a guillotine and actually lifted him up off his feet with the move. LeBay tried to use a Northern Lights suplex to escape, but Shamrock blocked the suplex, but LeBay landed on top. Shamrock had him in a guard. LeBay did manage 2 elbows under the eye before Shamrock rolled him and actually backed off, letting LeBay get to his feet, which in a sense was a surprise since Shamrock is a ground specialist. LeBay had noticeably tired by this point and his leg already had the bullseye on it from the earlier kicks. Shamrock kept kicking the hamstring and decked LeBay with a punch. Shamrock didn't attack LeBay on the ground and waited for him to get up. This apparently was in response to a pre-match interview where LeBay talked of his prediction for the fight that he would knock Shamrock down, let him get up to punish him some more and then continually knock him down again. Shamrock went in for the kill standing, knocking LeBay down a second time with a knee to the chin and then started throwing punches on him while he was on the ground, opening up a large cut on LeBay's forehead that eventually needed 6 stitches. Shamrock then maneuvered LeBay's head right by the cage post and used his head against LeBay's chin to bend his head, locked into position by the post, into a terrible angle, and LeBay tapped out. This was also a very exciting match. Shamrock did a pretty good interview after the match as well, saying he was ready to accept all challenges. Japanese television rundown. October 3, New Japan. 1. Don Frye and Brian Johnston beat Tatsumi Fujinami and Akitoshi Saito in 9:41. The match started slow but picked up midway and turned out to be a lot better than you'd think, largely due to Saito. The fans really got into Saito making comebacks with leg kicks on Frye, and for Fujinami giving Frye the dragon screw. Frye came back after the leg kicks and pounded Saito into the ground, which looked like the finish to the point that Johnston had picked Frye up in celebration. Saito rose to his feet and made a comeback with leg kicks and got an armbar which caused Fry to go to the ropes. Fry came back and pounded him into the ground again for the knockout finish. 3 stars. 2. Shinjiro Otani and Tatsuhiro Takaiwa beat Jushin Liger and Kendo Kashin in 1732. Believe it or not, while a tons better wrestling match, these guys didn't get the heat of the previous bout. But it's probably impossible for these guys to have a bad match. Ending saw Liger miss a pescado on Otani. In the ring, Takaiwa dropped Kashin's throat on the top rope, then they did a double-team combination power bomb and missile dropkick on Kashin. Finally, Takaiwa used a double power bomb followed by a Death Valley bomb on him for the pin. 3 3/4 stars. 3. Genichiro Tenryu and Shiro Koshinaka and Michiyoshi Ohara beat Scott Norton and NWO Sting and Michael Wallstreet in 11-12. About what you'd think. The crowd was into Norton versus Tenryu, not that any of it was all that good. Highlight was Norton giving Ohara and Koshinaka vertical suplexes simultaneously. Tenryu pinned Wallstreet after a lariat. 1 1/4 stars. 4. In the tag team tournament finals, Kensuke Sasaki and Yuji Nagata beat Shinya Hashimoto and Kazuo Yamazaki in 1709. Most of this match was a showcase for Nagata, who sold most of the way and looked great on his comebacks, in particular when in with Hashimoto. Sasaki didn't look good, and he seems to be getting worse. It's almost weird to see him in these matches because all the Japanese heavyweights are so technically good in the basics, and then when Sasaki is in there, you just never know what you're getting. Finish saw Yamazaki kicking away at Nagata, who broke free, threw some hard blows to the face which Yamazaki went down from and grabbed an armbar with an immediate shoot-like tap-out. Fans weren't ready for the finish, but bought it because it looked like something they've seen in real matches. 3 1/4 stars. October 4th, All Japan. This was a weird TV show because it consisted of 1-minute clips of a lot of different matches. With only one 30-minute TV show each week, it's just weird to see them almost waste what little TV time they have showing clips from previous shows, showing a 1983 match where Koshinaka beat Mitsuharu Misawa with Luthez as ref, Misawa's first ever All Japan TV match, and stuff from the previous tour. One thing interesting was showing a lot of clips of Stan Hansen in with Yoshihiro Takayama in different matches. As washed up as Hansen is and as bad as Takayama is, for whatever reason, they have great chemistry and have great heat working together. The fans seem to be into the idea of seeing legend Stan against someone with a UWFI background. The only match that aired for more than a minute was from Korakuen Hall earlier that night with Misawa and Yoshinari Ogawa beating Akira Taue and Tamon Honda in 13:21. It was edited down to 5:30 mainly focusing on Ogawa's spots. The work was solid, but unspectacular. The story was really only the finish, where Ogawa pinned Taue, although Misawa clocked Taue with an elbow knocking him down where Ogawa caught him with a cradle for the pin. Pretty good pop for the idea of little Ogawa pinning big Taue, but it was bad because Taue feet were all over the ropes which was ignored since that was the finish. October 10th, New Japan. 1. Sasaki and Yamazaki beat Fry and Igor Mindert in 9 minutes. Mindert, a 6'8", 285-pound flabby Russian former amateur star, doesn't know what he's doing. It was basically a mess. At one point Yamazaki flipped up to give Mindert an Enzui-jiri, but Mindert simply fell on him. Yamazaki finally put him away with an Achilles tendon submission. They had the typical Fry pull-apart with Sasaki after the match. Dud. 2. Otani and Takaiwa retained the IWGP Junior Tag title beating Chris Jericho and Black Tiger, Eddie Guerrero, in 1932. A good match, although at times Jericho and Tiger seemed a bit too Americanized in their offense, which didn't look as solid as is the standard for New Japan. Otani was really good here. At one point Jericho had Takaiwa in the Lion Tamer but simply let him go. Jericho and Tiger also did a Power and Glory with Jericho delivering a superplex off the top and Tiger then using a frog splash on Otani. Tiger followed with a BT bomb on Otani. Otani did his really hot spinning Liger bomb on Tiger for a near fall. Tiger came back with 2 brainbusters for near falls. Finally Otani hits a springboard dropkick to the back and a dragon suplex for the pin on Tiger. 3 1/2 stars. 3. Norton pinned Nagata to capture the vacant IWGP Heavyweight title in 11:11. This match wasn't nearly as good as I'd been led to believe. Norton just played Superman not selling a thing. It was good doing the monster spots early, but that should build into him getting tired and selling late, and that never happened. Finally from the bottom Nagata used a triangle and armbar which they called the Nagata Special. There was some decent heat as they teased a submission, but Norton wound up just powering out of that, delivering 2 lariats and powerbombing Nagata for the pin. I fail to see what this kind of a storyline did to build up Nagata. 1.5 stars. Mexico. It appears that Paco Alonso is finally going to make the ultimate decision of aligning with WCW or WWF after more than a year of negotiations, with both sides going hot and cold. Bruce Pritchard and Victor Quiñones are expected to go to Mexico on October 23 to try and work out a deal and sign up Mexican talent for the debut of the Super Astros show on November 1 in Austin, Texas. Alonso is then scheduled to meet with Sonny Wanu and Eric Bischoff at Halloween Havoc on October 25 to try and formalize plans for a deal that would result in a WCW vs. EMLL feud at Arena Mexico. Dr. Alfonso Morales has continued to write articles regarding Conan, now attempting to keep him from getting a work permit in case the WCW deal goes through. Morales criticized Conan for posing in the United States as a Mexican, claiming he's the son of a Russian father and Cuban mother. Actually, Conan's biological father was Puerto Rican and his name at birth was Carlos Espada, but his mother when he was young married a Russian who adopted him and his name legally was changed to Charles Ashenoff, but when he went to Mexico, he claimed Carlos Espada as his name and that he was born in Cuba because he was a babyface and Mexicans don't like Americans. Morales said that his serving time in the U.S. Army proves that he was not born in Cuba as he claimed. Morales claimed that he feels like vomiting because Conan passes himself off as being Mexican in WCW, and asked the Secretary of Foreign Relations to not allow him a work permit to return and wrestle. It is believed that Lismark Sr., 49, real name Juan Baños, will be retiring at the end of this year after a 22-year career. Lismark, originally a cliff diver out of Acapulco, is one of the all-time legends of Mexican wrestling and one of the original wrestlers to popularize topes and planches. There is apparently a lot of promotional bad blood now between EMLL and IWRG. A lot of talent had been working for both groups. The problem stems from Marcos Moreno, IWRG promoter, creating his own Mr. Niebla, the same name as an EMLL star, who recently won the group's middleweight title from Tokyo Magnum. The IWRG Niebla has wrestled under such names as Hitano, Coloso, and was the second Conan in Tijuana during a promotional war and many years back when a bodybuilding contest open to all pro wrestlers in the country. October 16 at Arena Mexico was something of a disaster. The main event was scheduled as Felino and La Fiera and Negro Casas vs. El Satanico and Scorpio Jr. and Fuerza Guerrera, which on paper is a good match. However, Pierroth Jr., scheduled for the semifinal, no-showed the card without calling. They put the main event on fourth and had the Good Workers do a slow-paced stall match for as long as they possibly could, set to be just shy of 60 minutes, waiting for Pierroth to either arrive or at least call. They managed to get Apollo Dantes to come in while the guys were stalling and he replaced Pierroth in what was scheduled as the semifinal, teaming with Mascara Año 2000 and Grand Marcus Jr., losing to Lismark Sr. and Emilio Charles Jr. in Atlantis when Charles pinned Mascara with a Rana victory roll, which for trivia notes, was a move invented in the 1950s by Emilio Charles Sr. The last 2 matches were said to have been really bad. The reason Pierroth no-showed out of protest for being booked in the semifinal. With most of the top draws working a show that night in Tijuana, October 23, Arena Mexico has Rayo de Jalisco Jr. and Teen Nieblas Jr. and Atlantis vs. Los Hermanos Dinamita. Olympico defending the CMLL welterweight title against Halcón Negro Jr., Headhunters and Brazo de Plata vs. Marcus Jr. and Dantes and Blue Panther and Yoshihiro Tajiri and Oriental and Ringo Mendoza vs. Virus and Zumbido and Karloff Lagarde Jr. On October 2 in Tijuana, they had a triangle mask versus mask match with Depredator, Síndrome, and Blue Demon Jr., which Síndrome lost. October 16 in Tijuana was headlined by Pero Oguayo vs. El Hijo del Enfermero in a hair versus hair match, and while we don't have the result, you can bet Oguayo won. You can also pretty much bet it was awful. Benjamin Mora is running October 23 in Tijuana with El Hijo del Santo, who is out of action currently due to legit sciatic nerve damage from all the years of pounding, and Casas and Charles Jr. vs. Pierroth Jr. and Villano Tercero and Fuerza Guerrera on top, plus Pimpinela Escarlata and Tornado Negro and El Hijo del Enfermero vs. Super Parka and Zorro and Venom Black. AAA announced its final major show of 1998 will be called War of Nations on December 13 at El Toreo in Naucalpan, which will be a big weekend in Mexico since EMLL will be running its year-end show at Arena Mexico on December 11. AAA has been running the Guicho Dominguez, famous actor, versus Tirantes, longtime heel ref, feud as the main thing on TV. Stemming from the match in Madero, Tirantes has had to be Dominguez's slave and he's had to Besides dress up like a woman, not just wear a dress, but a wig, full makeup, etc., and walk around during lunch hour in the busiest section of Mexico City, but also dye his hair green, work one night as a male stripper, and perhaps funniest of all, dress up like an Indian warrior and sell beads at an outdoor market all day. His humiliation period is over, and on October 11th in Juarez, Tirantes attacked Dominguez and Dominguez actually juiced. Dominguez didn't go to the police because he's been watching Nitro and Raw, and instead went to a more powerful and less corrupt authority, Antonio Pena, to demand retribution. Fuerza Guerrera, in an interview in Box E Lucha, said that the biggest payoff of his career was $12,000 in 1991 for a mask versus mask match at Arena Mexico against Gallo Tapado that he won. It noted his record as being 20-0 in mask matches. Rayo de Jalisco Jr. retained the CMLL heavyweight title, beating Cien Caras on October 13th at Arena Coliseo. The finish of the match was the exact same one, with Rayo winning with a small package of their September 21, 1990 mask versus mask match at Arena Mexico, which is one of the legendary matches in Mexican history, and believe it or not, was a really good match. That was the show that interest was so high that fans turned away at the door because it sold out, overpowered security, and more than 6,000 fans without tickets made their way into the upper deck, the weight of which caused the upper deck to crack, and they had to close down the arena for 1 month for repairs. Anyway, this was their first tip match in Mexico City in 8 years, and it didn't draw. Casas pinned Blue Panther in a best-of-3 falls non-stip match to headline Arena Coliseo on October 18th. All Japan. Vader has officially agreed to start working as a regular with this group, which is the biggest news in this promotion in a long time, as it creates a lot of new matchups, which, handled correctly, should draw both in singles and tags with Stan Hansen. Vader and Hansen as a team should revitalize Hansen, who is by far the most famous foreign wrestler in Japan, for one last big money run. Giant Baba wants Vader to begin at the tag team tournament, which starts November 15th and work 23 weeks next year, but Vader was hoping to start in January and work less weeks. Since the tag tourney is traditionally the biggest tour of the year, I'd expect him to be working it, and as a novelty teaming with Hansen in all these cities for the first time, it should help the company's pitiful attendance. Although this is a traditional company, it would be best in the long run for everyone for Vader not to work a full schedule and instead come in just for the last week of every tour so he could get some press and build up to a big match at Budokan. His working full-time will just result in him becoming less special that much quicker, so his box office effect will be weakened, not to mention this style will cause him, at 42, to either work such a tepid style that they're not getting the real Vader, or be the real Vader, and he'll break down due to injuries. WWF has agreed to send Bart Gunn to the tag team tournament to be Johnny Ace's partner, even though it was reported in the Japanese mags that Gunn KO'd Steve Williams in the Brawl for All. There really isn't any interest in seeing him in with a rapidly declining Ace. It's hard to imagine they'll have many good matches either. At this point, there are no long-term commitments past simply sending Gunn between WWF and All Japan, but it does once again open the doors of communication up. The official announcement of Vader and Gunn in Japan is expected to take place at the October 31st Budokan Hall show, and it looks like the tag tourney will be Mitsuharu Misawa and Yoshinari Ogawa, Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Taue, Kenta Kobashi and Jun Akiyama, Vader, and Hansen. Ace and Gunn, Johnny Smith and Wolf Hockfield and Gary Albright and Yoshihiro Takayama as the main contenders, and perhaps adding an out-of-promotion team or two as well. October 4th TV did a 2.4 rating. New Japan. The major show of the week was October 18th in Kobe before 6,600 fans in the 8,000-seat World Memorial Hall. There were two major angles shot. After the main event, where Genichiro Tenryu and Shiro Koshinaka retained the IWGP Tag Team titles, beating Keiji Muto and Hiroyoshi Tenzan in 23-36 when Koshinaka pinned Tenzan. Muto had words with Tenzan and called Tenzan's arch rival and the best young heavyweight worker now in the company, Satoshi Kojima, into the ring. Muto took the NWO t-shirt off Hiro Saito and threw it at Kojima, and Kojima took the shirt. It wasn't made exactly clear what all this entails, as there was speculation that Muto and Kojima would form a Japanese wolf pack of sorts, to feud with the main NWO headed by Masahiro Chono, or simply that Muto and Kojima would form a tag team. With Chono gone due to injuries, Muto has been wearing I Am Boss on his trunks this tour. The other big angle was that Great Sasuke pinned Koji Kanemoto in 1747 with a Hurricane Rana, and had Jushin Liger in his corner. After the match, Liger and Sasuke said that they were going to form a tag team to challenge Shinjiro Otani and Tatsuhito Takaiwa's IWGP Junior Tag Team titles, and that they would capture all the junior heavyweight belts in both New Japan and Michinoku Pro. Sasuke, who has been doing the Sandman drinking and smoking gimmick on Michinoku shows, was doing the Raven gimmick of sitting in the corner on this show. In the other top matches in Kobe, Don Frye beat Akitoshi Saito in their grudge match in 5:41 when the ref stopped the match, and Kojima, in his first match back after eye surgery, teamed with Manabu Nakanishi to beat Yuji Nagata and Takashi Iizuka, while Otani and Takaiwa lost a non-title match to Liger and Kendo Kashin. On October 20th, Chono held a press conference and did an angle claiming he had gotten a telegram from Eric Bischoff, who was mad about what Muto did and wanted him kicked out of the NWO. Tenryu challenged Riki Choshu to come out of retirement and wrestle him one last time at the Tokyo Dome on January 4th. I don't expect this to happen, but if it does, it would be the sign that they are really worried about being able to draw this year, as Choshu had told people he was never coming out of retirement unless it was desperately needed for business. Speaking of tough draws, the UFO promotion added 2 more matches for its October 24th debut show at Sumo Hall, which will be Tiger Mask from Michinoku Pro facing Ikuto Hidaka of Big Japan. These two have faced each other often in Michinoku rings. And get this weird match, Satoru Sayama vs. Kevin Rosier. They did a big newspaper angle this past week where Inoki took Sayama to the temple that Rikidozen took he and Baba about 37 years ago, and where Inoki got his head shaved, and Inoki shaved Sayama's head. Rosier is a washed-up 6'4.5" and 320-pound former kickboxing champion who was in the first UFC, losing to Gerard Gordeau in the second round. Has since done a lot of MMA fighting and has a terrible record in it, including losing 2 recent matches in less than 1 minute to Dan Severn. Since Sayama is 5'6" and he'd be under 200 in condition, although he hasn't been in top condition in years, these are going to be worked shoots, and no doubt Sayama is going over. It's going to make quite a weird visual. To boost ticket sales, Inoki announced that he would take on anyone who wants to show up that night in the building, and they pretty well hinted that Shinobu Kondori, the women's shooting star of Japan after her win over Svetlana Gundarenko, which was played up huge in all the magazines as the second biggest story of last week behind only the Gracie Takata, Yuki Ishikawa of Battle Arts, and Alexander Otsuka, who made himself a big name in one night beating Marco, who might accept Inoki's challenge. They also announced Scott Ledoux as the head referee for the promotion, who is a former heavyweight boxer who once challenged for the title in the 70s and later worked as both a referee and an occasional wrestler, and had a mid-80s feud with Larry Zbyszko in the AWA. Inoki said UFO would run one more show in 1998 and run monthly in 1999. As mentioned before, it may draw early as a novelty, but this group looks to be a disaster waiting to happen over the long haul, at least until the interpromotional aspect of it picks up momentum. On the current tour, Mike Enos is teaming with the Japanese as a WCW wrestler, feuding with the NWO/Aristos group, which includes Americans NWO Sting, Bryan Adams, and Michael Wallstreet, and Big Titan from Aristos. October 3rd TV did a 3.7 rating. Other Japan notes. The Atsushi Onita vs. Mr. Pogo match on the November 20th FMW pay-per-view show has been cancelled, as Big Japan, the company Pogo is the top draw for, is running a show the same night. I guess after shooting the angles and everything, it means that there was some business problem between the two companies, and this was a graceful excuse to exit, or it's a way to shoot another angle. Onita then challenged former rival Tarzan Goto, but Goto said he wanted an empty arena match. Jerry Lawler and Terry Funk had a famous empty arena match in Memphis in the late 70s that this is patterned after. This is billed as Onita's final match ever, sure, with FMW, as he's going to start his Uso, which basically means liar in Japanese, promotion, with 3 shows from December 12th to December 14th at Korakuen Hall, which will include Sabu, Rob Van Dam, Bubba Ray and Devon Dudley, Tommy Dreamer, Shane Douglas, and Francine. ECW will tape at least 1 television show from this tour. Battle Arts officially announced for its November 23rd Sumo Hall show that the Road Warriors would face Otsuka and Muhammad Yone, and that Taka Michinoku and Shoichi Funaki would wrestle Minoru Fujita and Ikuto Hidaka. Pancrase on October 26th at Korakuen Hall has Masakatsu Funaki vs. Kyuma Kunyoku, Jason DeLucia vs. Keiichiro Yamamiya, Minoru Suzuki vs. Omar Buish, Manabu Yamada vs. Kengo Watanabe, Asami Shibuya vs. Kusei Kubota, and Ikuiza Minowa vs. Daisuke Ishii. JWP held a press conference, and as expected, it was to announce Cutty Suzuki's retirement. Unlike earlier speculation that had her continuing until March, Suzuki announced a farewell tour from October 17, ending up on December 27 at Korakuen Hall, which would include a October 21 Korakuen Hall singles match against Devil Masami. Kendo Nagasaki will be opening up a new promotion called Now. He had a group with that name that went out of business a few years back, with the first show on October 31 headlined by Nagasaki and Yuichi Taniguchi versus Yoshiaki Yatsu and Masahiko Kochi. Here and there. A bomb exploded on October 14 outside of Jesse Ventura's political office at 8 p.m., although both Ventura and police don't believe it was politically motivated. For whatever reason, we've been getting more phone calls on this subject than anything in wrestling over the past week, and that has to do with the latest roller derby revival attempt. Roller derby was a quasi-sport, in many ways similar to pro wrestling and drawing from the exact same fan base, that was very popular in the 60s and early 70s, peaking with once drawing a crowd of more than 50,000 fans for a 1972 game at Comiskey Park in Chicago, and basically died in the mid-70s, and there have been numerous comebacks attempted over the years, all of which went nowhere. As mentioned here months back, there were meetings involving Jerry Seltzer, the leading promoter during its big run, who's rather invented the game in 1935, TBS, and Eric Bischoff and Zane Bresloff of WCW to get involved. They ended up passing on the deal, and as it turned out, the Nashville network bid on it and will be airing the show called Roller Jam from 8 to 10 p.m. every Friday night starting on January 15. Seltzer as a promoter was in many ways the Vince McMahon of his era. As far as success, all similarities between the two end there. After folding roller derby amidst a messy divorce in 1973, Seltzer formed base ticket outlets in the San Francisco Bay Area and became extremely successful, and just got out of that business. Buddy Atkinson Jr., who was one of the top skaters during that glory period and whose parents, Buddy Sr. and Bobby Johnston, were legendary skaters in the 50s, whose wife Drusilla Scott skated in the 60s and 70s, and whose two children, Sean and Allie, skated in the 80s, will be training skaters to do a pro wrestling on wheels with heel and babyface teams and soap opera storylines. I'd suspect Sean, who I'd guess is in his mid-30s and was almost as talented at his craft as Ric Flair was in his prime at his, would be the top star in the game, as he was groomed for it from childhood, only to have no venue to show his talents when he was old enough to turn pro. At this point, the plan is to form 6 teams and tape 26 weeks of television at Universal Studios, basically getting the deal WCW left behind. The major differences between the old derby and this new version appear to be copying of the Nitro/Raw atmosphere, with the pyro and music, using inline skates, a faster track, and more modern, tighter-fitting lycra uniforms to try and play up the sex appeal of the skaters, which means, like with wrestling, they are probably looking more for look as opposed to athletic ability, which no doubt will cause all kinds of morale problems if this ever gets off the ground. One of the producers of WCW Thunder will head this, and WCW house show promoter Bresloff was offered the rights to promote touring shows should this venture get that far. My feeling is TBS probably made a mistake passing on this deal, and that if there ever was a time in the last 25 years that something like this would be a success, this is that time. The negative is that Nashville network probably isn't a strong enough station for this to get the mainstream cult appeal it would need to be a success. The tabloid National Examiner of all things had an interview with the producer of the November 1 NBC Secrets of Pro Wrestling special, and judging from the interview, and you know how accurate interviews are in that publication, it probably won't be nearly as bad as the press release indicated. The producer talked about the injury rate being high and was pretty realistic about the business as opposed to the business he was originally going to present. Apparently, as we had heard, several of the wrestlers were somewhat vocal about the direction of the piece, although there will be talk about plastic chairs that don't hurt, making reference to that they are sometimes used but more often than not that isn't the case, and pre-sawed tables, which also do exist at times, and blading, but that the physical punishment is very high in the profession. Christine Jarrett, the mother of Jerry and grandmother of Jeff, who worked in and promoted wrestling for decades in Tennessee and Kentucky, suffered a massive heart attack last week and at last word was in intensive care at Vanderbilt University Hospital. Jarrett, who started out selling tickets for Nick Beulah's promotion, became one of only 2 major female wrestling promoters, the other being the late Ann Gunkel, and the only one who had long-term success over the past 30 years in the United States, running shows in Nashville, Louisville, and Lexington. Peach State Wrestling put on a benefit show for Richard Wade, the husband of Betty Wade, 70s woman wrestling star Joyce Grable, who has piled up heavy medical bills and brain damage after a heart attack on October 15 in their hometown of La Grange, GA. The show raised $4,500, of which $2,000 was the live gate and another $2,500 came from donations from largely the World Wrestling Federation and also Fabulous Moolah's Liwa. The main event saw Randy Rose and Masked Superstar, Bill Eadie, beat Terry Taylor and Sheik Donovan. On the October 17 Memphis TV show, they announced Stacey was injured on October 15 in Lula, Mississippi by Rex King. Hales ran down Bill Dundee as being too old, saying that he has to put Dundee in the ring with young guys or else people will switch off their TV sets. Carl LeDuc, the legit nephew of area legend Jos LeDuc, debuted. Hales wanted Carl to take a blood oath and slice up his arm with a sharp axe as his uncle did in a 70s interview that was replayed for the next 20 years in the territory and which probably no human being living in Memphis hasn't seen at least 5 times in their lives. Carl acted like he thought it was crazy. Hales wanted him to get an axe and Carl said he didn't have an axe and Hales said he must not be a real LeDuc and went out to get a knife for him to slice his arm with. Jerry Lawler ended up pile-driving LeDuc. Lawler also threw a fireball at Bulldog Reigns. Dundee did an interview yelling at Hales for booking him against Derek King and Kid Wicket in a 3-way, saying King was nothing but a computer nerd who helped Hales set up his computer and taught him to use it, and that's why he had a job, and that Wicket who was only in the business because he grew up as Brian Christopher's friend. Rex King beat up one of Sid Vicious' friends and they said Sid would be back next week. Main event was Lawler vs. Rex King in a Coward Waves the Flag match with Dundee and Hales in the respective corners. Dundee started pounding on Hales with the flag and the ref saw Lawler's flag waving and awarded the match to King. Naturally, this led to Lawler and Dundee arguing. Music City Wrestling has taken its interpromotional angle one step farther. The original feud was MCW Georgia, headed by Bill Behrens, feuding with MCW Tennessee, owned by Behrens playing a heel owner but with Burt Prentice in the rival babyface exec role. To further the angle, Prentice is now running shows on Friday nights. First show was October 16th in Nashville as opposition to the MCW Saturday shows for a promotion called Alternative Wrestling Federation to build up an interpromotional series of matches. The AWF show had mainly Memphis talent like Dundee, Ashley Hudson, Bulldog Reigns, Franz von Keller, Heinrich Franz Keller in Memphis real name Trey Keller, and Derek King along with MCW wrestler Shane Eden, Wolfie D and Terry Golden. MCW the next night used some of the same talent including Colorado Kid defending the NA title, which is the same physical NWA NA title belt that Jeff Jarrett wore on WWF TV, against Dundee on top. MCW's next big shows are October 31st and November 26th in Nashville. Jim Kettner's next Aqua show will be November 28th in Wilmington, Delaware with Christian Cage and Andrew Martin from the WWF as headliners. Cage beat Sean Stasiak to keep the Aqua title on October 17th. 2 new champs in NWA New England. Curtis Slumdog won the New England title from Barry Windham on September 19th in Everett, Massachusetts, and Mercenary won the TV title in a triangle match over Slamdog and Millennium on October 17th in Melrose, Massachusetts. Correction on a result from September 26th NWL in Hagerstown, Maryland. It was actually Manny Fernandez over Terry Funk and not Funk winning as reported. Television ratings for the Monday night AAA wrestling show from 8 to 9 p.m. are in the 2.2 range in Los Angeles and Chicago but in the 0.4 range in Miami, New York, and San Antonio. Chuck Williams, who wrestled in the Northeast Indies as Rockin' Rebel, will be getting a tryout for the 1999 season with the national champion Philadelphia Wings of the Pro Lacrosse League. ESPN2 has been running a show called ISKA Pro Sport Judo, which was developed by Mike Swain, who was a college classmate of mine and went on to become the first American ever to win a World Judo Championship and now coaches the national team, and one of the announcers was Neil Adams of Great Britain, who for trivia's sake, is the younger brother of Chris Adams. Neil Adams captured a silver medal in judo in the 1984 Olympics. Chris Adams was a British judo champion himself in the 70s before getting into pro wrestling. And his ex-wife Jeannie Adams, now Jeannie Williams, came up with the character of Stone Cold Steve Austin. Apparently by some sort of divine miracle her creation wound up exactly like the real-life Vince McMahon. On the same TV show were matches of something called ISKA Pro Sport Jiu-Jitsu, in which Frank Shamrock did the color commentary and also came up with the rules, which were basically the same rules as Pancrase except the fighters wore gloves and there were no rope break escapes. They did one taping of that in New York several months back and nothing has transpired since. Pyramid Entertainment is going a Wrestle Jam nightclub tour around the country, which would consist of 4 pro wrestling matches combined with musical acts. The first show was held last month at the Lagoon in Philadelphia, which included Tito Santana, King Kong Bundy, and Honky Tonk Man. MMA. We'll have a detailed report on the KRS Pride 4 Tokyo Dome show in next week's issue. There are a lot of reasons being given for Marco, who has lost to Alexander Otska. Apparently the one getting the most play is that who has suffered a knee injury in training and the drugs he was taking destroyed him in the fight. By the way, the reason Otska is so popular among the gay community in Japan is because as a pro wrestler, he does a gay act, although he isn't in real life. Who is said to badly want a rematch. On the UFC pay-per-view show, announcer Mike Goldberg said that 40% of the nation of Japan viewed UFC Japan last year. Actually, the rating was something like a 4.1 with a 34 share, which is an excellent share but hardly 40% of the nation. Tickets for the December 13th K1 Grand Prix finals at the Tokyo Dome go on sale on October 24th. Last year K1 set a record by selling the Dome out. They had it set up for 55,000 tickets in 1 hour. The gate for a sellout, which I'd think would be a formality as this is the Japanese equivalent to the basketball Final Four as far as being an in-demand ticket, is scaled at about $6.1 million. ECW. The only thing new on the pay-per-view is that the Just Incredible vs Masato Tanaka looks to be off, and it'll be Tanaka and Balls Mahoney versus the Dudleys. Apparently there was some major heat because Paul Heyman wants the tag belts on the Dudleys and this to be a tag title match, and Sabu, who holds the title with Rob Van Dam, wasn't in a good mood all weekend over dropping them. It is expected that ECW will start airing in the UK on the Bravo channel. Nicole Bass and Big Dick Dudley were backstage at the Raw tapings at Nassau Coliseum. The advance for this coming weekend in Pittsburgh was ahead of the previous show, and that show drew 3,470 fans. This weekend was an Alabama tour, which drew 1,074 on October 15th in Montgomery, 450 on October 16th in Ozark, and 1,150 on October 17th in Birmingham. Robert Gibson and Rex King debuted, with Gibson looking good and working hard and putting Tommy Rogers over in openers, and King looking decent losing a bout to Lance Storm. Van Dam worked twice with One Man Gang, with the first match being pathetic and the second match being shockingly good. The Ozark show was said to be real bad because the building wouldn't allow them to do any swearing, no tearing dresses off women, no blood, no lewd mannerisms, and basically nothing that people go to see ECW for. Jerry Lynn missed the weekend being banged up with injuries. Shane Douglas looked a lot better this week in the ring, although by Saturday night after the shows his arm was back in a sling. A correction from last week. In the Chris Condito vs. Lynn match at the ECW arena, Mikey Whipwreck gave Tammy Sitch the stunner while pretending to be blind and now knowing who he was grabbing, and she was helped out, and not the opposite as we reported. While both Tammys are good to look at, physical comedy is not their forte, as the former Dawn Marie's interference set a new level for the term lame, and the real Tammy is usually 2 steps slow on every spot. Sitch is featured as a model in the new bodybuilding magazine called Pump. WCW, the bizarro world of pro wrestling regarding the self-destruction of Scott Hall, played out before our eyes as a television angle which makes him more popular and more cool by the week, is that wife Dana was on an Orlando radio show saying, among other things, that she may write a book about wrestling and that 99% of wrestlers were taking drugs. Hall's latest out-of-the-ring situation, which has largely been blown up out of proportion, took place after Nitro on October 12th when he had a skirmish, if that's the right term, at the hotel bar with Marcus Bagwell. Hall, who from most accounts, even from those who consider him a friend, has been impossible to deal with of late because of the course he's on, to the point everyone questions why he just isn't sent home, and the fact he isn't makes me think some of this may be worked out ahead of time with Bischoff, although those arrests are definitely real and his problems, including 3 rental car crashes, are scary real. He's blown rehab on numerous occasions, and many nights shows up in no condition to work. Is being allowed and in its own weird way encouraged to keep this up for sake of storyline credibility is sick even by the standards, or almost total lack thereof, of a sick, twisted industry. Anyway, Hall was mouthing off to Bagwell about his angle that night and running Bagwell's ability down, and Bagwell slapped him twice, although wrestlers describe them as working slaps, which was the extent of the altercation, which all witnesses said was provoked by Hall. His ex-wife, who has been largely vilified since she put photos of her children on the net, appeared on an Orlando radio show where she claimed 99% of wrestlers were on drugs. Deborah Duggan, wife of Jim, called up and claimed it was 10%. I guess it all depends on what you mean by on drugs, as every wrestler at one time or another takes painkillers, but that doesn't in many if not most cases constitute having a drug problem. Billy Gunn then called up and said that his wife would kick him out of the house if he was on drugs. Dana Hall has since claimed that almost all the wrestlers fool around on the road, get BJs from rats, and that the wives of wrestlers are really naive that believe their husbands aren't fooling around or doing drugs. Needless to say, she isn't the most popular person in a lot of wrestling circles these days, Probably because in a lot of cases the truth is not very popular either. Added this week to Halloween Havoc are Wrath vs. Meng, and now the Disco Inferno vs. Juventud Guerrero winner will later in the show face Billy Kidman for the Cruiserweight title. Nitro on October 19th in Minneapolis drew a sellout 15,722 paying $279,326. Actually this sold out in 1 hour. The first day tickets were put on sale. Perry Saturn pinned Kenny Chaos in 4:16 with the Death Valley driver. Crowd was super hot early and this was a real good match on both sides with super heat. There are plans to give Saturn a big push, including some in the company who are trying to sell the idea of having Bret Hart do a US title program with him. Ernest Miller did an interview. He also got great heat. A plant from the crowd hopped the guardrail. The last time they did this angle it resulted in them having crowd control problems for 2 months all over the country, and Miller kicked the guy, who was a big power plant guy named Columbo. The LWO, Damien and Hector Garza and Psicosis and Dandy, beat Chavo Guerrero Jr. and La Parca and Cyclope and Lizmark Jr. in 5:49 when Psicosis pinned Cyclope after a leg drop off the top rope after Parca turned on his team and cracked 2 of them with a chair. Good high-flying match, particularly Parca and Psicosis, with great dives. The announcers were paying such close attention to the match they didn't even recognize Parca had turned on his teammates. After the match, Eddie Guerrero came out. This week he got no crowd reaction as he gave the LWO shirt to Parca. Chavo acted like he was going to get the shirt and when Parca got it, he stormed off and talked about forming a Pepe World Order. The idea of where this is all going is that Guerrero is going to do a Jerry Maguire gimmick as a sports agent where all the Mexicans will negotiate through him and he'll take 50% of their money, making them wash his cars and basically take advantage of them since in wrestling, all non-Americans except for Canadians are inherently ignorant third-world peasants. Chris Kanyon beat Scott Putski with a flatliner in 4:11. Poor Kanyon works so hard, but the question is, who gets more heat in their matches than Kanyon? Scott Steiner came out to a face reaction and called Mrs. Bagwell a tramp. Rick Steiner came out. The two had a really heated brawl ending when Scott used a low blow and went for a chair shot but Bagwell came out to save Rick. Rick and Bagwell shook hands. Segment was really over with the crowd. David Finlay pinned Davey Boy Smith in 3:21 with a move that was more of a pancake than a tombstone piledriver, after Alex Wright had dropkicked Smith off the top. After the match Finlay beat up Wright. Finlay worked hard, but he wasn't successful in having a good match against an inanimate object. Chris Jericho did an interview to set up a TV match against Page. Apparently Goldberg nixed the idea, after they did all the angles to start it, of doing a program with Jericho. Jericho was then offered a program with Kidman, but Jericho, Guerrero, Benoit and Malenko are trying to get away from the cruiserweight division, which by their size is what the division was originally designed to highlight guys like that, because of the feeling it would stigmatize them negatively. Bischoff is already putting the pressure on guys like Guerrero, Rey Mysterio Jr., Benoit and Jericho, all of whom have about 1 year, in Mysterio's case more like 9 months, left on their contracts to sign now. Wrath pinned Magnum Tokyo in 1:18 with the meltdown. Wrath is starting to be taken seriously by the fans. Benoit and Malenko replaced Silver King and Super Calo beating Disco and Wright in 2:52 when Benoit used the crossface on Wright. Bischoff did commentary and claimed that Anderson was now fired and Benoit and Malenko are suspended and from this point forward they're working for free. Like anyone believes that. Jericho beat Page via DQ in 5:40 when Goldberg speared Jericho just as Page was going to give him the cutter which would win the TV title. Page was then mad at Goldberg for costing him the match, but before going nose to nose, gave Jericho a cutter for good measure. They had a pull apart. Good TV match and good angle. Kidman kept the cruiser title going to a time limit draw with Mysterio Jr. in 13:23. Very good wrestling but very little heat. Mysterio Jr. was limping again, but from what we're told, his knee went out at one point but it went back in and he was fine after the match. However, by Tuesday, he was limping badly and the trainer told him because of the buildup of scar tissue, his knee is going to be very sore until he gets it used to wrestling, and he was told to rest it for another week so he missed the Tuesday TV and probably won't work on the pay-per-view. Fans paid no attention even though the moves were great and it built well. They were chanting mainly Green Bay sucks. Fans booed the kickouts from near falls as well. Mayor Sharon Sales Belton came out and was booed out of the building and there was a huge Jessie chant. She took it in stride, and invited out Kirby Puckett and John Randall. Randall, one of the NFL SAC leaders, is a big wrestling fan. She then brought out Flair to make the day Ric Flair Day in Minneapolis. Didn't she already do that months ago? Bischoff came out and he argued with the mayor, Randall and Puckett made mean faces and Bischoff backed down while Flair was behind them. This stuff is really making Flair look weak, like he's a 70s manager hiding behind his guys. Sales Belton did a great job on the mic telling Bischoff to get out of town, and a police officer told Bischoff he had existing warrants and if he didn't leave they'd arrest him and take him to prison. Bischoff ended up leaving, and in the back they were towing away his car. It was a good segment and an amazing one to see such a high-profile politician doing a pro wrestling angle to get over. The world gets stranger by the minute. Connon and Luger and Nash beat Hall and Stevie Ray and Scott Norton in 6:19. Nash was pretending he was drunk, as was Hall. When they finally tagged in, Nash acted as if being drunk was all an act, sobered up, punched Hall a few times to a huge reaction, and then just as the match was getting heat, the bell rang for absolutely no reason. The match ended and then the place booed like crazy. It was as if they're copying these crappy, not even worrying about doing finishes endings from the WWF. They were building up the dream main event of Hogan versus Horace the entire show. Hogan said he would never wrestle Horace because it was his dead brother's son, which is true. He told Horace to say his name and told him to shoot, which when that word is used on TV, guarantees the next thing is a lie, and Horace said his real name was Horace Hogan. Hogan talked about how much he loved him and brought out the rest of the NWO. Naturally he turned on his nephew, as if Ray Charles didn't see that one coming because he did the exact same angle with Ed Leslie and Nasty Boys when the NWOs first formed, beat him up, whipped him with a belt and gave him a hard enough chair shot to bust him open big time. Horace really was taken to the hospital because the cut was so deep. They took Horace out on a stretcher and Hogan kicked over the stretcher. The rest of the NWO was actually trying to stop Hogan. Warrior made the save and they booed him anyway. He looked terrible hitting everyone with lame baseball bat shots until Giant Choke slammed him and Hogan spray-painted NWO on him. Finally Hart challenged Sting, and they did pretty much of a nothing match for 4:09 ending when Sting refused to break the Scorpion on the ropes. Finally Vincent and Ray pulled Sting off, but Sting dropped Vincent in the Scorpion death drop and ran Ray off as well while Hart limped off. They announced a return Nitro date in the building on February 1st. Both Entertainment Tonight and Access Hollywood have been backstage at recent Nitros, apparently trying to get interviews hyping the NBC piece. Norton suffered a shoulder injury at Nitro. No word on how that affects his trip to Japan scheduled for this week and his October 30th IWGP title defense against Shinya Hashimoto. Viano 4 had successful neck surgery on October 9th. They had to take bone from his hip to reconstruct his neck. He'll be out 5 to 6 months but was told he'd be 100% when he returned. The current idea is for Raven to do a losing streak gimmick which would wind up with his mother going on TV and saying that he's made up all those stories about his childhood. Raven has been dying to do this angle for a long time and it predates Bagwell's mom being a TV star. The idea is for it all to wind up with Raven doing a program to attempt to revitalize Roddy Piper. Raven went to the ECW show a few weeks ago and was making it clear he wanted to leave for ECW. Of course if he wanted to talk to Paul Heyman, he could talk on the phone, so being there was a maneuver to get the word spread and maybe that would result in him being put back in the spotlight. He's got 2 years left on his contract, although with the exception of Hogan and Page, there is probably nobody in the company who has been given as much control over getting a lot of TV time over the past year. Sandman is going to be allowed to use the cane from what we're told, and the group that got him in is working pretty hard to see he gets a push. Both Hogan and Warrior merchandise can't even be given away. Warrior has asked to produce and control his own merchandise. Word we get is Booker T may make a surprise return at Havoc. Bischoff wants Mysterio Jr. and Juventud Guerrera to join the LWO. He nixed Mysterio Jr. joining the Wolfpack. It's going to be a very interesting dressing room when it comes to booking the Hogan-Warrior finish on Sunday. Realistically, Warrior is dead and Hogan should win, since Hogan still has money matches on the table against Hart, Nash, Goldberg and even Flair if they play their cards right. Warrior doesn't, no matter how much people want to fool themselves into thinking he does, but getting Warrior to lose won't be easy. We have very little in the way of details on the Saturday night TV taping on October 20th in Mankato, Minnesota. There was an Eddie Guerrero vs. Jericho TV title match which saw Jericho try and leave but the rest of the LWO threw him back in. They had a good match but nobody could figure out why the crowd started chanting USA, USA during the heat. First day ticket sales in Detroit for the November 22nd World War III pay-per-view were 11,000 tickets and $370,000. As you can figure, despite it being an annual disaster in the past, the plan once again is to headline with a 3-ring battle royal. Kidman, Disco and Jericho taped a segment of The Dating Game this past week, all doing their wrestling characters. The girl chose Jericho, saying she liked how he wanted to be her role model. The New York Times was this past week working on a story about the Mcmahon case regarding protecting his sources. Goldberg and Page have been working on their match at the power plant. Thunder on October 15th drew a 3.50 rating for the taped show. Only thing of note on the entire show is that Kidman and Kaz Hayashi had a real good cruiser title match. Jackie Chan's management is claiming that he isn't going to be doing any pro wrestling. Ernest Miller was still talking about Jackie Chan on the Thunder, but that was taped on October 8th. When Miller did his interview on October 19th, not only did he not mention Chan, but he wasn't with Sonny Wanu, who seemingly was jumping onto a high-profile media feud when Miller was being groomed for Chan. Nobody at WCW talks about Chan anymore either. WCW Saturday Night on October 10th did a 1.8 rating, and on October 17th it did a 2.2. The only show this week was the Nitro at the Target Center, and merchandise was $131,353 or $8.35 per head. Some talk of Terry Taylor playing a heel booker. House show lineups are completed through early December, and they are mainly cookie-cutter lineups. They really don't say much because the angles are almost all done at the last minute, so the cards never take place as advertised because angles make them obsolete. November 7th in Pittsburgh has Goldberg vs. Giant, Sting vs. Norton, Luger and Rick Steiner vs. Bulldog and Neidhart, Saturn vs. Finlay, Vincent vs. Barry Horowitz, and Chris Adams vs. Sick Boy. November 28th to 29, Johnson City and Knoxville have Hart vs. Page, Luger and Rick Steiner vs. Ray and Brian Adams, Jericho vs. Booker T, Benoit and Malenko vs. Finlay and Mike Enos, Meng vs. Wrath, Bulldog vs. Wright, and Kidman vs. Disco. December 2nd in Nashville is the same card except Page vs. Giant as the main event. WWF Raw on October 19th in Milwaukee drew a sellout 12,157, paying $235,043. Show opened with a tryout match as a local Milwaukee wrestler, whose name we didn't get, lost to Takamichi Noku, but the guy was said to have looked really good. Matt Hardy beat Andrew Martin, who looked okay. In matches taped for Shotgun, Outlaws beat DOA when Paul Ellering accidentally hit one of them with a briefcase. Christian kept the light heavyweight title, beating Dick Togo. Edge pinned Mark Merrow. Bradshaw pinned Bob Holly. Oddities beat Three Guys, and finally Gangrel pinned Scorpio. Live show opened with all the wrestlers in the ring as McMahon talked to them about firing Austin, and they showed Austin with the gun on the screen. X-Pac pinned Ken Shamrock in 4:16 with a facebuster after Mankind distracted Shamrock in a non-title match. China was then taken away by the police to jail. Let's see. You can hold someone hostage and aim a gun at their head, and that's fine. You can admit to being an arsonist who killed their parents and maimed their little brother, and that's fine. But you can just stand there and be arrested without any charges being given. It was another bad night for storylines to make sense, not to mention for the local police. Speaking of local police, the two cops who went to get Austin's autograph were Richard Fink, who actually is a Milwaukee County sheriff, and Andy Eisenhower, who does a policeman gimmick on local indies as Blue Steel. Headbangers, wearing phony tag titles to mock Outlaws, beat Animal and Drozdov in 1:55 when Drozdov was distracted by Hawk and pinned. At this point, Mankind and Sheriff Sacco with a badge on his sock came into McMahon's office to keep him company and have a slumber party, which was funny. Undertaker came out with Paul Bearer. They've turned the guy so many times that nobody cares about him. He got no cheers or boos. Now he's the one who set the fire after all, although now the fire only deformed poor Kane and the part about his parents dying in the fire has been forgotten. Undertaker's interview was almost as bad as a Warrior interview, as these storylines really make almost as little sense as WCW storylines. Mankind was playing Twister and Vince got mad at him and he left. Steve Blackman beat Jeff Jarrett via DQ when Blue Blazer attacked Blackman at 2:32. Deborah McMichael, who signed this past week, came out with Jarrett. Al Snow and Head came out for the save. Head was distracted by Deborah's latest boob job. So is the Head a lesbian? That allowed Jarrett to hit Snow with a guitar. McMahon wanted to leave, but was kidnapped. Rock pinned D'Lo Brown with a rock bottom in 3:38. After the match, Mark Henry gave Rock 2 more splashes and left him laying. Tiger Ali Singh came up with Babu roasting weenies. An obvious plant, the Kielbasa Queen from the Howard Stern Show, brought her boob job to the ring and pretended she was having oral sex with the weenies, and Singh gave her $500. Godfather came to the ring and explained she was one of his hoes and he wanted the money. Singh attacked Godfather, and in a sloppy brawl, Godfather slammed Babu. Austin made Vince say oink, oink real loud, tied him up and put duct tape over his mouth. Val Venus, selling his groin, beat Mankind in 3:32 when Shamrock hit Mankind with a chair. Mankind and Shamrock brawled into the crowd and another Goldust video aired. It ended with Venus walking out on Terry Runnels. And poor Jim Ross was having to try and sell this hostage situation as McMahon's acting got worse and worse with every segment. Undertaker and Kane had one of the worst main events ever on Raw, and imagine what that takes into account. They did nothing until both were in the casket and destroyed the casket. Finally Kane chased Paul Bearer up the aisle, and you know you've got to work on your speed when you can't catch him in a sprint. Taker gave Kane a chair shot from behind as both went backstage. No heat for the match and the fans booed heavily as both went backstage at 5 minutes. Finally Vince was crying, taken to the ring and wet his pants. October 19th tapings from Madison, Wisconsin drew a nearly full house. It opened with Shotgun as Miguel Perez and Jesus Castillo won a squash over Steve and Mike Anthony. Venus beat Bob Holly. Holly was wearing a JOB Squad t-shirt. Venus and Terry argued after the match and he walked out on her again. Henry won a squash over a guy with Scotty written on his trunks, Minnesota wrestler Scotty Zappa. Hawk and Drozdov beat Hardy Brothers. Hawk and Drozdov argued after the match. For heat, Christian kept the light heavy title beating Brian Christopher. Bangers beat DOA, Bangers mocking Outlaws ring intro and wearing the fake belts. Blackman pinned Bradshaw. After the match, Jackal was talking to Bradshaw. Motley Crue played a new song and were pretty much booed. Scorpio was in the ring and Blazer jumped him and left him laying. Jarrett beat Golga when McMichael stole Cartman, threw it back to Golga and Jarrett pinned him from behind. They started a tease for Luna vs. McMichael. Finally Shamrock and Brown beat X-Pac and Mankind when Mankind put Mr. Socko Claw on Shamrock, but Shamrock still back suplexed and pinned him. A few fans hit the ring during this match. It only took one day after Nitro in Minneapolis for the problem to come up, as this was a really drunk crowd and fans were out of control with 5 fans hopping the guardrail at various times during the show. For Raw, McMahon came out with 3 attorneys, acknowledged that Austin had been signed to a new contract but said he'd go to the Supreme Court to keep Austin from wrestling. He was also mad at the Stooges for not helping him at the last Raw. In a European title match, X-Pac beat Blackman via DQ when Steven Regal attacked X-Pac and Outlaws made the save. Regal was moving pretty slow and looked out of shape, so he's still far from 100% after all his injuries and health problems. Rock beat Drozdov. After the match, Drozdov and Hawk argued again with them shoving each other, and Animal sided with Drozdov and they walked away without Hawk. Kane pinned Gangrel. After the match, Gangrel and Christian were fighting with Kane until Edge did a run-in, but he joined them in attacking Kane, so they're all now a new group. Outlaws and X-Pac came out and did their introduction, calling Motley Crue the tag team champions of the world of rock and roll. They played their song Wild Side and were being booed out of the building. Finally DX came out to dance with them and the crowd warmed up a little. Motley Crue is totally not over in Madison, to the point that their last concert there earlier this year had to be cancelled because nobody bought advance tickets. Austin came out and said he had a contract that guaranteed him one title match. McMahon acknowledged it and ordered him to face Shamrock in an I Quit match because he wanted to hear Austin say I quit. Shane McMahon came out and turned face on his father, saying he was behind Austin, that he signed Austin to the contract, that he's tired of listening to his dad and he's his own man, and just like his dad he was showing he had the balls to stand up to his dad. The one good thing about the business being on such a roll is that there is no need for booking to make sense and both sides just book to fulfill their own egos. Vince cried when Shane kept complaining about how his grades were never good enough and he was never good enough and all he wanted was his dad to respect him. Singh wrestled Godfather. This match may not air as the crowd started chanting "eat shit" and "fuck you" really loud because they were bored with the match. Apparently this chant started at Wisconsin Badgers football, but the WWF officials all acted confused. They just ended the match and had both guys walk out because the crowd wouldn't stop the chant. Kaientai beat ICP and Kurgan and Golga via DQ when ICP threw the ref out of the ring. Kurgan and Luna were arguing with ICP before and after the match. Goldust beat Mero after a low blow. Absolutely no heat for the match or crowd reaction to Goldust. Goldust was as lewd as ever, including mocking like he was jacking off to Jacqueline, who slapped him and he kissed her. Sable then challenged Jacqueline to a title match at SummerSlam. While this was going on, another fan hit the ring. Outlaws defended against Snow and Mankind. The crowd paid no attention to the match and was back to doing the "eat shit" and "fuck you" chants. It ended when Road Dogg was ready to be beat, but the Head and Mr. Socko started arguing over who would score the pin, and Road Dogg recovered and pinned Mankind. The Head and Mr. Socko started arguing and Snow stole Socko while Mankind stole the Head, but they eventually gave them back and left together. Brown and Henry then attacked Outlaws. Finally, Shamrock vs. Austin I Quit match ended when Mankind put the claw to lay Shamrock out. Briscoe tripped Austin at one point and Patterson beat up ref Tim White. Austin hit Shamrock with a chair and when White revived, Austin grabbed Shamrock's hand and tapped the mat. After the match, Austin gave Patterson, Briscoe and Shamrock all stunners and Shamrock did hit act after the match. Mark Canterbury is still spending a few hours a day in traction. The last word we heard was that Triple H would be returning at Survivor Series, but with the angle on October 18th, it almost looked as if he was going to need the second operation, and that was the cover story. The article on the wrestling boom in Playboy is still on, however the Sable pictorial as part of the article isn't. Seems the two sides were far apart on money terms. Big mistake on Playboy's side. With all her TV exposure, a Sable pictorial would be a huge seller. Drozdov has signed a contract extension. The main reason Motley Crue was on Raw was to get some exposure as they are starting their own concert tour. I thought the segment where DX was in their trailer was pretty weak because it made DX seem like geeky marks in the presence of celebrities, when the top wrestlers are supposed to be and are celebrities themselves. They've been working on signing up real-life tough guys to face Bart Gunn in Brawl for All matches. They've talked with Butterbean, but at this point his schedule doesn't allow it. They are thinking about using some ex-UFC guys as well. While the long-term plan is to eventually program Deborah McMichael with Sable, that's probably 3 or 4 long programs down the road. Vader's final date will be October 25th at Madison Square Garden. In his release, there definitely was a clause that wouldn't allow him to go to WCW until December of 1999, which is when his WWF contract was to expire. He's opening up a Gold's Gym in his hometown after selling his piece of a mall he was part of developing. He actually had a clause in his contract requiring him to stay below 350, and even though he made weight at the last weigh-in, he apparently crash-dieted to make it. McMahon wanted him down to 320 and he was told he'd get a big push if he got that low, but it was never put in writing and he was 346 at the weigh-in and there was no push coming. WWF will start with a much improved television situation in Germany as of January. The Austin vs. McMahon episode of MTV Celebrity Deathmatch airs October 29th. The Los Angeles Times is working on a WWF story for mid-November. Austin did a taping of the Ricky Lake Show on October 13th, but no word on when it will air. Expect a storyline of Austin winning the Rumble to get him a title match at Mania. While Hart has been bothered since July by a nagging groin injury and being taken off the house show should help him rest it up, the angle isn't being done specifically to explain his injury absence. Sable this past weekend was auditioning for a movie role. After the episode of Pacific Blue did a 3.6 rating last week, one expects they'll find more ways to write her back into that show. If there isn't enough wrestling on Mondays, ON will be airing a special on the life of Andre the Giant on October 26th. MSG on October 25th was switched from a tag team main event to a 4-way with Austin, Rock, Undertaker and Kane in a cage with Slaughter as ref. SummerSlam in 1999 will be from Target Center in Minneapolis. Advance for Survivor Series in St. Louis on November 15th at press time was 12,644 tickets and $351,000. Johnny Stewart met with Jim Cornette and Vince Russo about doing a Jerry Maguire sports agent gimmick. Champions, a movie starring Shamrock as an Ultimate Fighting Champion that was filmed a few years back, will be released on video on December 8th. Sunday Night Heat on October 11th drew a 3.55 rating and a 5.95 share. The Live Heat show on October 18th drew a 3.69 rating and 5.99 share. Pac Blue actually maintained the entire Heat rating, actually slightly upped it to 3.58, with Sable and did a 2.5 the next week. For October 10th to 11, Livewire did a 1.6 and Superstars a 1.8. For October 17th to 18, Livewire did a 1.7 and Superstars did a 1.8. Besides the pay-per-view, the only show of the week was Milwaukee, which did $69,505 in merchandise or $5.72 per head. The Reader's Pages. Rick Martel. Wrestling truly lost one of its real good guys and gentlemen when Rick Martel retired. Perhaps one of the best compliments that can be said about him is that after spending decades traveling the world as an athlete, Martel rarely had a bad word said to or about him. He was always in top physical condition and was completely believable as a pro athlete. In my 25 years of being a wrestling fan, The best live match I ever saw was Martel defending the AWA title against Nick Bockwinkel on November 5, 1985 in Utica. He exited pro wrestling because he knew it was time. The business that he grew up in and contributed positively to had disappeared. He was able to leave because he could, as he was wise with his finances. I've always been a fan of his, and as a friend of his, I'm proud that he always gave it his all. Don Label. In New York. Terry Garvin. I was sad to hear about the passing of Terry Garvin. When I was working for the WWF in the 80s, he would always call me to see if I was available to replace a wrestler due to injuries or other problems with the talent. He would always ask how my young family was and was always respectable around me. When I would call the office, Terry would always take my call and have time for me when others wouldn't. He was easy to talk to and always had good advice for me when the other so-called Indian strongbow could have cared less. The Terry Garvin I knew was a good and caring person. Your story on Junkyard Dog was terrific. Jid would always make sure I was taken care of, give me advice on what motels to stay at and the best transportation in towns. He, South Dakota Jones, and Tito Santana were always a great help on the road. Steve Gator Wolfcatcher. St. George, Utah. Fall Brawl. Our friend who hosts the wrestling party showed up 90 minutes late for Fall Brawl. After watching the last half of the show, we thanked him for making us miss the first half. Sounds like the first half wasn't much better. We're hoping for a power outage before the next one. Steve Lockwood. Shorewood, Minnesota. Tributes. Being a subscriber since 1993, I can't tell you how much I enjoyed the Tributes book. I was born in 1972, so that made me 11 when David Von Erich died and the first Texas Stadium card was held. Looking back, I can't emphasize enough how well the Jack Adkisson spin machine worked. Being young, my only outlet was the Apter magazines, which I accepted as the gospel at that time. The people of Texas were able to smell out the rat early, but a legion of Von Erich fans, myself included, bought into this wholesome image, and exploitation never even crossed our minds. It wasn't until I subscribed to The Observer that I had any clue of the dark side of this family, so I want to belatedly thank you for what I think was one of the finest reports anywhere that I've ever read. A question about Bruiser Brody. I know Jose Gonzalez was acquitted, and since I've been a subscriber, no new facts have come out. I was wondering if you could give a brief summary of the trial's aftermath? You were right on when you said he'd tear up a place even with only 200 fans in the audience, as I saw firsthand in 1986 when he and Abdullah the Butcher came to Providence, Rhode Island, and had a wild brawl that made a disastrous show worthwhile. Anthony Pierce. Pawtucket, Rhode Island. DM, there really isn't much to say. Gonzalez was acquitted by reasons of self-defense. He never took the stand. No American wrestler testified in Brody's behalf for reasons ranging from subpoenas arriving after the trial was over to alleged death threats. Gonzalez returned to wrestling as a babyface and was back working in the front office, and now, at the age of 53, he's still in a top position. It's not exactly one of pro wrestling's most heartwarming stories. I recently ordered the Tributes book and was very impressed. I've been reading The Observer for about a year and a half, and most of the obituaries I had never read before. The book itself is very professional looking and the pictures were a nice touch. Something in the book got me curious. In the photo of Oro, he is wearing a mask that looks similar to the mask Rey Mysterio Jr. wears. Is this merely coincidence, or does Rey wear the mask out of tribute to Oro? Am I the only one who thinks Nitro should be reduced to 2 hours? I tape the replay and watch it later, and even fast-forwarding through the commercials the show drags on. If you take out the Hogan and Bischoff interviews and the Nitro Girls segments, you'd have a 2-hour show. Speaking of Hogan and Warrior, I went to 2 WCW house shows recently and came to this conclusion. WCW doesn't need Hogan or Warrior. They should get rid of both of them. I doubt TV ratings or pay-per-view buy rates would drop significantly. It wouldn't affect the house shows at all since neither work them. Or at least Hogan rarely does. Aaron Hallman. Columbus, Ohio. Response from Dave Meltzer. When Nitro went to 3 hours, largely to avoid giving the second hour of Raw a tremendous lead-in, I remarked that it would be very obvious when 3 hours were too much. That's when the ratings of Nitro would drop significantly in the third hour. That has rarely happened, so 3 hours isn't too long for the average viewer, and the show is aimed at the average viewer and not hardcore wrestling fans. I agree completely with your statement as it regards Warrior. But as much as I'm not a fan of Hogan as a performer, he is still the biggest TV ratings draw in the business, and he is, with the possible exception of Austin, the biggest pay-per-view draw in the business as well. His being there does have a negative effect on the rest of the crew, and if he were to leave, WCW would still be strong, but it would still have many of its same morale and political problems. I think the best thing for the company is for him to slide out of the main event position and into a special attraction type of position, thus setting up new younger stars for the future. And by younger I don't mean the 40-year-old club that is sitting waiting 2 years for Hogan to retire thinking they deserve to inherit his spot, but I mean the 30-year-old club. But that isn't going to happen, so if Hogan were to walk away tomorrow, WCW would still be a bunch of 40-year-old guys with sunlamp tans, just none of which would have the mainstream name value to get an angle on The Tonight Show.